he's actually going to be in high school this year. And I was like, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah. How does that work, right?
It's okay. Chris told me I could.
Hello?
Unless it's blatantly, like, absolutely correct.
Am I hogging it back?
No, you're good. I think there are a lot of things for your signature tonight.
You're on track. Excellent. We'll be so looking forward to it.
I'm sure it's always riveting.
It will be riveting, I'm sure. You got the message that we're getting.
There'll be a
They've
video
obviously not read the agenda. Huh?
I'll be so disappointed. You don't do it tonight, you have to do it tomorrow. Your show.
How are you?
I know, right?
Michael.
And John.
Looking good.
Hi.
Mr. Sweeney.
I was gonna.
All right, guys. I'm making some progress here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Stop it.
Carol, how many do I need? 50?
50, but we,
How many do I need?
we should probably get at least 60.
You only have 13?
Dude, I got 2 weeks. Carol will attest. I have a tendency to swoop in at about 4 p.m. the day
I
of.
was just talking to a buddy. And he was
Carol,
like,
can you stay an hour later?
I still work well in that last, like, you know,
actually
leave it
stay
till the last
open
minute. I
half
just
hour.
work better that way.
Yeah, yeah.
The only time I was really, really upset for somebody for doing that was Robert Millar for school board chair one year. He ducked it badly. And yeah, 'cause he was getting signatures for other petitions and not doing his own. And then like the last day, he's like, I took a day off work and ran around and beat on doors to get him on that for school board. Yeah.
Asked for council petition.
The offer still stands if you want to give me a sheet.
Yeah, it's somebody Eric knew. Is that the only one? Did a gentleman come in? Yeah, I don't think so.
What, is there other candidates for mayor?
No, I think we'll have. I do think we'll have 2
Need a good
that'll
race.
essentially run.
Tori came in for her school board, but nobody else has come in. But again, they can get their petition offline too, though.
Yeah.
Do you think you're gonna have 2 run for council or for mayor?
For council. So it'll be 3. You guys will have to have riveting debates.
Oh, you're gonna have work to do this time.
Not gonna happen.
And we've got to beat in the bushes to make sure we have at least 1 for that seat. And I came up totally insane. Everybody's either pregnant, planning to have a child, or
Oregon's gonna have to be out there hitting the streets. We'll see you walking around the circle with the sun.
It's not gonna happen. I think you know better. I do appreciate the picture, however. You painted a delightful one.
I will run for that.
As imaginary as it is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
what do you look for on a campaign director?
Yeah. Somebody that doesn't mind walking around the circle holding a sign.
You want to make me up a shirt with your face or something?
There you
I'll
go.
wear it around.
With a red line through it.
We'll start out no red line, and then I'll, ask you about your policy,
Well, I don't
and
Yeah, they have like one.
slowly the red line comes across.
He's set up in a telephone booth. Just like Superman.
Gonna say he was just wearing a t-shirt when I drove
I know, he
in.
hopped in a telephone
He looks
booth.
slightly different than when I last saw him.
Yeah.
Now you're You're showing him up.
I've been promised John, I believe you.
I made mistakes today. You're doing the dancing. You say all that.
You guys dance, go win the budget presentation.
Do they get a bonus?
On the table, we're gonna
Budget, you also award best.
That's right, we'll have awards.
Underwhelming, you know?
Just remember, everybody gets a trophy.
Right now, put it on camera, you're dead. Do it.
We got some Hall's Defense down
So-
here if you need it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell me you brought a pen, so we're not sharing.
I did not.
Oh, she's trying to kill me this year.
Did you like your own pen?
Do you have a daycare in your house? Can't you survive anything?
I can, actually.
I
They're gonna cut me open and find a plague of some kind that we don't know about.
Francis, first day of daycare, gets some crazy stomach bug, goes through my whole
happy
family.
Yeah,
belated
oh, yeah.
I'm like,
birthday.
really? First
Day
day
one?
ever of daycare?
Day
Come
one?
on.
It's the same, the budget book has the same stuff.
After a year, though, nothing will hit them.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the point, you know?
Yep.
really testing my feet.
We did do several polite.
We did try several ways.
First two. Right, are we good? Great. Okay. So being hair past 6 p.m. on Tuesday, January the 16th, 2018, we'll call over the regular City of Winooski City Council meeting and ask that everyone please join us for Pledge of Allegiance led by Deputy Mayor Brian Corrigan.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's like,
Couple fake outs there.
I'm just waiting for Nicole.
Okay, first up is agenda review. This is an opportunity to move any items on tonight's agenda. Any concerns, questions, comments regarding the agenda from council? Any questions, concerns, comments from the public? And so seeing and hearing none, we'll leave the agenda as it stands. Public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the council on items that are not on tonight's agenda. I'll remind you that there is an agenda in the back, and we do appreciate that everybody please sign in to ensure that we have a record of who attended and who spoke tonight. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address council on something that's not on tonight's agenda. Okay, so seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to our consent agenda. We have 3 items on tonight's consent agenda, and we will be required to split those items out. So first, I'd like to take approval of the city council minutes from January the 8th, 2018 as a singular item.
I move we approve the city council minutes of January 8th, 2018.
Second.
Motion by Nicole, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Those abstained? Is everybody in attendance?
Who's here?
Really?
Wow,
I mean, why you took those separately?
sorry about that. I thought we had one missing. Okay, the minutes are approved as presented. We'll now take the other 2 items in tonight's consent agenda, the warrants for accounts payable from January 12, 2018, subsequent to payout for November, as well as the Headworks Project State Revolving Fund Loan Agreement for preliminary engineering. And for folks, I need a reminder there, that's a project that we went through last week, and it probably should have been on as an approval. It was on as discussion, so we have it on tonight in that manner. So with that, I would entertain a motion on the approval of items B and C on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Brian Corrigan, second by Nicole. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. Consent agenda is approved as presented. City update.
Great, thank you. So a couple of updates from the last week or so. First, wanted to thank everyone who came out to the Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service yesterday. In Winooski. It was a great day. There are lots of interesting comments on Facebook and in the media about it as well. I especially want to thank Afea Arvista for organizing, Paul Sarn for being out and about all day, and the whole community services crew. We had about 60 volunteers come out and do different service projects across the city, so thank them as well, and to Congresswoman Welch for joining us for dinner. Last Wednesday, we had a pretty significant internal to the building water line break at 70 Main Street, which is the parcel right here at the top of the Rotary, the old Key Bank building. We were able to isolate, Public Works was able to isolate the building on the water line and not lose water to the rest of downtown, which was great, but it did result in many, many gallons of water flowing through the Rotary. So we're currently working with the property owner to assess how they can move forward with their structure, as well as our city costs that were incurred as a result of that break. It was right at the end of the Main Street meeting. Lots of excitement. No one was hurt. Property had some significant damage in it, so the question is whether they'll be able to make it habitable again or not. You've probably all heard that there was a pretty significant structure fire at 65 Barlow over the weekend on Saturday. 8 units were displaced. Nobody was hurt. None of our firefighters were hurt. But again, a big thanks to our mutual aid partners, specifically Colchester and St. Mike's, their National Guard, the Red Cross, and the staff who responded. Winooski Housing Authority it was a Winooski Housing Authority building. They were great at providing support for their residents and getting them all relocated quickly. 2 last things. As you know, we use the software Firehouse for our rental registry program and fire. We've been using that for about a year and putting data into it. The technicians from that software program are in the city this week, helping us think about how we maximize the data going in and maximize how we pull out the data. So while not in tonight's presentation, you can expect to see that more often. We're really excited about how we might use that data to inform conversations we have about housing quality, things like that in the future. And then finally, just tonight's the public safety budget hearing. Then we have 2 more meetings of budget discussions before final approval of the ballot, of the amount for the ballot. So just a heads up that I'm going to put on next council's agenda next Monday, a general budget discussion to hopefully get your thoughts on where you are and things you'd like us to cost out, so we can do that analysis in the week between meetings, so we can come with a number we're really confident about based on what you'd like to see in the budget. So if there's any additional information you'd like before that conversation, obviously feel free to ask us tonight during the conversation or send us questions as well. Thank you.
And hopefully that'll limit the Wizard of Oz effect where we send Angela to the back and Yes, or live edit on the screen, so a good idea, and look forward to that. Okay, we'll turn it over to council reports. I think we started there last time, so here.
Yes, so at the last Public Safety Commission meeting, the bulk of the discussion is in regards to the budget and the impacts of the budget as it relates to those areas of work around public safety. So we have at least one member of the commission here, and I believe we're expecting another. So rather than belabor my time, I think we'll likely hear from commission members after the presentation of the Public Safety Commission budget, just to hear from them about some of the discussions they've been having regarding the world of public safety.
Nothing from me at this point.
Great. Well, the Planning Commission's been really busy, considering the downtown project in addition to moving forward with the planning process. So we're going to hear a lot more about that today too, so I also will not belabor that point. Just want to extend all the thanks to the first responders for their great work around what could have been a really messy situation in a really densely populated building. So great work, and we appreciate it. And also just chuckle at the fact that it doesn't really matter who the city manager is when they leave. Disaster usually strikes. So thank you all for stepping up, though. It says a lot that we have a team in place, though, that responds and just falls right in line and gets that stuff done in the meantime. So that's great. Thank you. Mr. Gordon?
Nothing at this time.
Jesse and I meet regularly as part of my liaison role to the administration, and I did ask her whether my reaching out to the pool committee would be appropriate, given the city staff are not going to support fundraising efforts, but interest in making sure communication is clear, and we're able to ensure we're all staying on the same page after a pretty productive meeting, I think, a while ago. And Jesse didn't raise any red flags for me, and connected me with the folks on the committee. So I did send an email offering my support and Councilor Covey's support also, because I touched base with him. So I'll let you know where that goes. But just looking to be able to connect with that group as they continue to meet to discuss a fundraising plan for the pool. Cool. And I also just want to reiterate thanks to city staff for the Martin Luther King Day of Service. I thought it was really wonderful to have those kinds of opportunities in our community for folks to give back. And I actually met a number of folks not from Winooski who came here to volunteer because they were just looking for something to do, and not every community offers those opportunities. So it was a real moment of pride for me that we have a community that puts the effort, and I know that does take effort to structure those opportunities. So anyway, really appreciate it. It was a great day.
Thank you. Okay, we will now move into our regular items. So first up this evening has been the source of a number of really productive meetings the past couple of weeks. We have up for approval of the Main Street Revitalization Project, approval of the preferred alternative recommendation from the Planning Commission.
So I'll have Paul Dreher come up as well for this one. So this is a follow-up to our Wednesday evening meeting last week, which was incredibly well attended and I think a really exciting meeting. As you may remember from your approval of us moving forward with this Main Street project a couple of months ago, this preliminary engineering scoping part of the effort has the engineer put forth two alternatives, has the community identify a preferred alternative, and then moves that preferred alternatives through initial design to get to an estimated cost to do the project. So that's where we are right now. Because the Planning Commission has made a recommendation of a preferred alternative, we thought it was important to bring that to you all, give you an update, and assure that you are on the same page as we move forward in this process. So Paul, if you want to give a quick update about Wednesday evening.
Sure. So as Jesse mentioned, Wednesday evening was the preferred alternatives meeting, which is actually a required meeting for us to go for some of the funding sources. So we are doing this both because of interest from the public and also requirements. The two alternatives that were presented on that evening, one involved alternative one, generous wide sidewalks, parking aisles, narrowed down travel lanes, and well, on both sides, a 6-foot tree belt for trees. And the alternative two had slightly more narrow sidewalks, slightly more narrow tree belt, and a dedicated bike facility on Main Street. There was vigorous debate over the course of the evening, and at some point the Planning Commission and the Public Works Commission went into their own deliberative session, and the Public Works Commission recommended to the Planning Commission that the Planning Commission accept alternative one, the one without the dedicated bike facility, and they voted that night unanimously to support that and move it on to you for your support. In addition to the bike facility, the alternative one not having a bike facility on Main Street, it does contemplate and promote the bike facility on Weaver Street, which is a part of the Transportation Master Plan and also the Form-Based Code visioning documents. And the Planning Commission recommended that additional support for bike infrastructure, meaning sort of soft infrastructure, sharrows, and that sort of stuff be layered into the Main Street portion of the proposal so that Main Street becomes increasingly more bike friendly while not having its own dedicated facility to bike infrastructure. Does that summarize it?
Beyond that, Paul, can you talk, I know that the bike facility was the big conversation point, but any other kind of glaring differences that we should point out between the two alternatives?
Well, while it's still in design stage, so we don't know if this will be something that sticks with the project, but right now the one alternative one without the bike facility has a roundabout at Spring and Main Street, a mini roundabout.
Mm-hmm.
The bike facility alternative would not allow for that, or if it did allow for that, we'd have to acquire land from adjoining property owners. So that was another predominant difference. And in general, the landscape architect, Mike Willard, from VHB, commented that trees will tend to have a better lifespan and grow taller in the wider tree belt. So I think those are some of the big differences. The other piece, I'm sorry, one other. The dedicated bike facility does not, alternative two, does not allow for parking on that side of the street where the facility would be located. And it also, for the most part, prevents bus usage on that side of the street because the bus cannot pull off into where the parking aisle would be.
Refresh my memory, please. The alternative one, is that the one that has more of the rainwater catch basins?
Correct.
Available in that?
Yes, it has more rainwater, more green infrastructure, because we have more real estate to do it in.
Right.
Following the meeting, were there any conversations or interactions from the public that staff heard back from, or from any other agencies that were present or nonprofits that were present around biking? Did we receive any feedback?
We did not specifically that night. However, we did invite Jason Von Dreich from Local Motion to our next weekly update meeting with VHB to get his input on how to really make our bike infrastructure within the city more robust.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think the other, the CCRPC was very pleased with the end results. They had, atypical for them, had endorsed alternative one as, because it was in the Transportation Master Plan and in the Form-Based Code project. So, and there are bike advocates in the city that are disappointed that alternative 2 was not chosen, but I think the vote speaks for itself.
Can you speak a little bit more directly to the transportation plan and the form-based code and how bike infrastructure fits into those plans? Weaver Street versus Main Street?
Sure. In the Transportation Master, both, there's a dedicated bike facility proposed on Weaver Street that would be a dedicated two-way cycle track. The two different plans, Form-Based Code and Transportation Master Plan, have it manifest slightly different from each other. But in both cases, it was envisioned that they were part of the larger network of bike routes that would take one down, for example, to West Canal, where you could avoid the circulator altogether on a bike and get to the bridge if you were going that way. But again, both of them, in both cases, there was on Main Street a share-o coming down the hill so that bike traffic could share the lane with automobile traffic on the downhill side. And as a result of Wednesday night, we will explore how share-os or other types of bike signage could be employed for the uphill side of Main Street as well to just enhance that functionality.
But if there is a bike facility up and down Weaver Street, then why would we also have share-os on Main Street? It seems like if the goal is to build a safe route for cyclists, why wouldn't we want to just direct this bicycle traffic to that safe route rather than?
I think that's the goal, but I do think that for the biker, the avid biker who wants to be in the traffic and wants to be on Main Street, we want to provide all the safety precautions we can for them. So signalize to the car driver or the automobile driver that this is a shared lane and that you both have a right to be here.
Okay. Thank you.
One of the kind of speaking points you traditionally hear from bike advocates is kind of the 80 or the 20-80% breakdown. You have 20% of people who are going to bike no matter what. They're always going to bike no matter what the weather. They're really committed. Those people will bike on Main Street regardless, and we need to keep them as safe as we keep everyone else. And then so it's like it's 20, 60, 20, and then there's 20% of people who are never going to bike who we really need to design to pedestrian-oriented development or bus development or cars. And then the 60% are really the ones you're trying to capture with those safe, protected, designated safe routes. So I think that's why we would need to have both.
Thank you.
Was there, I guess, my question is more specifically in relation to the rotary that's included in alternative 1, but I guess does apply broadly to intersections in general. Any discussion with the engineers on how the redesign would affect pedestrian traffic, specifically in regards to maybe children who are walking up to the school in the morning during a busy traffic commute period?
Yeah, I mean, the engineering and also the design would enhance the walkability of Main Street in terms of the traffic circle as it's designed. The crosswalks are significantly back from the traffic flow, so and there's actually a protected refuge in the middle, so that if someone's crossing, they cross their 11-foot travel lane and they can stop and be safe at a safe point in the middle and then continue on. So if there is, for whatever reason, sort of an aggravated traffic thing, there would be the capacity to stop in the middle. But in general, the slowing down of traffic going through the circle would actually make it safer for people to cross. And just another side note, we don't know how the engineering is going to fall out on whether or not the traffic circle makes it to the final cut, but at this point, with the current capacity, the throughput on the traffic circle would be, of vehicles, would be greater than the signalized light, and the backups would be typically less, you would see them less.
Didn't they say that at current traffic volume, that roundabout would pretty much be at capacity, though?
They said it, well, so that number where we were looking at was a projection out to future traffics, but the anticipated growth based on CCRPC's numbers is that if we grow the way we're continuing to grow, it would max out soon. However, what we didn't discuss that night, which is actually an important point to bring up, that the redesign of Main Street in general will, number one, slow down cars, number two, redirect some amount of traffic. So there is the anticipation that with increased bus ridership, increased walking, that you may actually see a total decline in automobile traffic on Main Street. And that would be an underlying goal of any project like this, when you're right-sizing the street or scaling it to all modes of transportation, that you'd start to see it even out a little bit.
It appears as I look at this that if we choose alternative one, if alternative one's accepted the recommendation, that the hardscaping, the infrastructure pieces would preclude a future potential protected bike lane. Is that correct?
Without another redo of the street,
Fairly significant.
yeah, I mean, or redo of one side of the street. Let's say that. So the hardscaping proposed in alternative one, very closely reflects what was in the form-based code street cross sections, but it would narrow down traffic lanes and, well, it actually, Seth, you could put Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, you could put a bike lane within the parking aisle. It would be, so if you
the bump outs then would be the issue.
The bump outs would be an issue, and you'd have to do some cutting there. But I think the impacts of the hardscape infrastructure of a bike facility might have longer term impacts than, I think it's easier to go to bike facility than to get rid of a bike facility, if that makes sense. Once your pavement's in place and your sidewalk's a certain width on both sides, with a bike facility, you're kind of stuck with that unless you redo the street again. Mm-hmm. So a concern that we heard that night, and we've talked about throughout the various visioning processes that I've been a part of, is again the trees. And I think one of the advantages of the alternative one is it does provide the ample soil base for better tree growth, which in alternative two, I think that's a real negative, is that the soil bed for the trees is limited.
I have a question about tree growth. So we heard, I believe last week, as part of the Public Works budget presentation, the need to look at the Allen Street bricking, because that's been disrupted by tree roots. So are there lessons that we can learn from that project that would be applied to the Main Street treescaping work to avoid the kind of, I'm not exactly sure how that will be addressed, but it is a pedestrian safety issue when you walk up the sidewalk and you've got bumps caused by tree roots growing underneath the bricking.
I think there is, and I think that the best practices we're exploring right now for that, the way the trees would be planted and mm-hmm. the root beds would be created, I think would, well, you can never preclude anything, but would largely, the technology has improved quite a bit in the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. So I think that you could eliminate a lot of that concern through the types of root bed systems we're looking at for both stormwater management and also for tree growth.
And the only other thing I'll add to that is, that is certainly something we're looking at. Another thing to look at is the species that are planted. So a subgroup of the Public Works Commission has started a kind of comprehensive tree inventory in the city, what we currently have and what would be ideal in the future. And I think part of that is looking at what species have been successful in the downtown area, what haven't, and then reassessing what would be successful with those smaller root balls up along as we redevelop other areas of the city. So I think it's both a planning and a species selection question.
I think the landscape guy from VHB at the meeting too did address and said that like there's ways for them to build infrastructure almost like milk crates under the surface so that it allows the roots to like have more space to actually grow instead of just like the downtown being like a 4x4 soil box and then it gets out. So it sounded like they had like at least a preliminary plan to address some of that to allow for like a more sturdy root structure that wouldn't affect the pavement or whatever you want to call it.
Those are the kind of new technologies that have arisen since the downtown was developed.
And in either case, with either alternative, I will say that the city staff has directed VHB to really push the limits in terms of not being shy to explore new technologies, new ideas, and really cutting edge kind of design in terms of stormwater management, root ball management, all that stuff. So I think that they have really clear direction that that's their charge.
You guys okay on trees? Some of those a loop back. I think one thing that's really hard from a public investment perspective for people to understand is large scale, true, just complete redos of streets like this happen rarely. And what is really challenging is just from a public perspective is that we're putting, somewhere between 10 and some odd $1 million into a massive reconstruction project. And as a city, we're not investing at the same time in hardscape that includes any kind of bike facility. And I think that that's a challenge and that we're gonna have to meet, should we go with this alternative, because when is Weaver Street gonna be done, right? Like when is that going to become a priority? When is that gonna be addressed? So I think that's a real challenge for people to, I think, link to, and not see an alarm bell about, because it's, okay, well, we've got this big project now. Can you knock out bike access and what would be the preferred method for some bikers, not all? And I see a lot of retractions personally from the dedicated bike two-way piece, as somebody who bike commuted until relatively recently due to a job change. But I see a lot of negatives to it, quite frankly. So I understood what some of the people were bringing up. I think it's the investment narrative that we have more of an issue with, of what we can expect in terms of support and actually getting the Weaver Street portion built out and what that would look like. I mean, we've got construct a bike facility on Weaver Street, but we didn't really go beyond that, to my knowledge, as to what that bike facility would look like, how it would interact with the way Weaver Street's currently constructed.
There was some original, like, in the transportation plan, I think there was some original drawings on just like, it wasn't like a separated bike facility, like by like pillars or anything. It was more just changing paint, basically, but dedicating bike lanes. I think there was something like at some point that started to look at it really like in a preliminary way, but that didn't, I don't think it took into account a lot of things like church parking and like whatever the like big glaring like
and the good,
issues are there.
The good problem there is a lot of the traffic that we're concerned with accommodating doesn't coincide with, well, some recreational would. That's a blanket statement. That's not accurate, I guess, but generally from a commuting standpoint, it's not as impacted. But I just want to lay out, I think that that's going to be a real challenge in accepting this, is having an urgency about us to ensure that we stay on investment in that, because this, as a, a community that's trying to be forward-looking and progressive in trying to accommodate that dense livability factor and encourage things like bike commuting, it does feel really important that we, in short order, try to align some resources to look at that. The other piece that becomes hard is then you're also fixing two, parallel streets to each other, where, guess what? There are other streets and areas that need attention too.
I think that is the bigger question I'm hearing from community members, not necessarily what will it exactly look like in scope, but what is the relation to the timeline of this project?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And is it not just being pushed off if alternatives won, without the dedicated bike lane as the direction that the city moves in?
So just for a quick second, foreshadow the next agenda item on your agenda is our city application to the CCRPC annual work plan, one of which is doing this scoping work for bike facilities on Weaver Street. So while it doesn't perfectly line up, it is an opportunity to leverage some funds from a regional partner to do this, to design out what this facility would look like.
Yeah. And then the other question that that I'll just go back to is or statement, maybe more so than question, is ensuring that there's as much structural flexibility built in as possible. There were a lot of wonderful engineers and very smart people who worked on the circulator. And we very promptly, 4 years later, spent over $1 million correcting those engineered issues with more engineers. So I think it's important not dedicate towards one vision or the other, but as much as possible recognize that it's going to be a very, very fluid situation, and that the way that it looks today and the demands on the street that we have today probably will not look the same, and most assuredly will not look the same in 5 years, and most absolutely assuredly will not look the same in 10 years. And that having a streetscape that can react to that in whatever way possible, as much as possible, is really important. I hope something that we really push on the engineering firms to think about when it comes to hardscaping. So, if autonomous vehicles come and no one has a car anymore within 7 years, right? I mean, then, there's the loss of 65 versus 90 parking spaces is a moot conversation point in discussion too. So many buses. And I guess that's just sort of something that I listening to all those conversations felt really important to try to enforce or impose upon those engineering folks, as you guys work really closely with them to try to ensure that that's being considered and thought of. Because everything was done so definitively there that then reshaping any of it was hard.
How does that work? I'm in terms of flexibility in the streetscaping.
I don't know. I'm not an engineer.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I mean,
just want to make sure. Do you understand what that means?
I have a sense, and I think that's been every conversation. We meet with them on a weekly basis, and usually it's about a 2-hour-long meeting, and we go through all the different current design iterations, and we're all very thankful we have Brian Lambert in our team. He's a really knowledgeable young engineer, and I think all these questions are brought up every step of the way, where we say, have you considered this, or what about this, to make sure that we do have this flexibility down the road. And one of the hurdles that Wednesday and tonight is about is getting us to alternative 1 or 2, so that we can focus on the details of how that falls out with one of the 2 alternatives. So if we end up with alternative 1, we'll be able to really look at all the different parameters that we would need to think about flexible design in terms of long-term life cycle uses. So
Thank you. So I guess I appreciate the concern that folks would have about timing of the bike facility. And I think it's just the nature of municipal development and infrastructure that you can't do everything at once. We've been talking about a pool for 2 years. That, you know, a lot of folks are frustrated about the pace of that. And the fact that both the transportation plan and form-based code plans envisioned this alternative one approach gives me comfort that we're sort of staying the course that was mapped out several years ago that we're little by little making progress towards. So I absolutely support bike infrastructure and think that we need to dedicate city resources to figuring that out. It looks like we're going to. And I think there's a lot of interest on a lot of different citizens for different pieces of municipal infrastructure to be built in order to respond to their lifestyle and interests. So I feel better staying the course with a plan, keeping the public informed and engaged along the way, obviously giving ourselves room for course correction. And it's not that we're locked in and that we're never going to change, but I would be reluctant to say the plan that was adopted for either the transportation plan or form-based code is somehow going to be changed substantially because of a public process that some folks not super happy with the selection.
I do feel challenged by it, and I think that in a vacuum, I would prefer a dedicated bike lane on Main Street. But, you know, as we were going through these different alternatives, there are, like you're saying, a lot of different interests, and we can't have it all at once. Like, there can be no utopian streetscape that meets every single one of these objectives, and so it takes a balance. So, for instance, for me, yes, I would really, really love a dedicated bike lane on Main Street, but does that mean that we're going to limit public transportation options for our community members who don't have reliable transportation outside of the public transportation system? So that's when a lot of these discussions get challenging for me, and how do we balance those values?
Right.
Can you walk me through a little bit in looking at the alternatives comparison, what the implications for alternative 2 not conforming to TMP and FBC regulatory maps? What does that mean, and what are the implications?
So that in both the transportation master plan and in the transportation master plan map is represented here. Both maps we had described the Weaver Street option and the Main Street having the Sharrows and the not dedicated facility. So in terms of past visioning, those two fairly significant visioning processes came up with one conclusion, that both cases Weaver Street should be the dedicated bike facility street. So in terms of the design, the engineering, and the planning, there was some emphasis to stick with the kind of ongoing trend that we've had with both previous projects.
That was the sole component of nonconformity, though, was the Weaver Street bike lane, or were there other components of the maps that alternative 2 would not conform with?
Well, I think with the form-based code map, and street typologies, the sidewalk widths and the tree belt dimensions were different. One of the things that, sorry, I'm gonna talk about trees again, but one of the things that was really prominent in the form-based code discussion was the importance of trees on Main Street. And so so I was part of that project, as you all know. We, the consultant team, did a lot of research into what was the appropriate size tree root bed, and we came up with that dimension based on best practices and best success in urban trees.
And I guess just for the folks at home who might not have been at the meeting the other night, do you mind just running through what some of the importance is in a healthy urban tree landscape in regards to our stormwater drainage systems, and what some of the other benefits are?
Well, it does, it cuts down on rain as it stops rain above the ground and stops some of the stormwater from hitting the ground in the first place. It does absorb car exhaust or car fumes. The sun shading really actually impacts the capacity to have cafe seating, all that stuff that we think we know and we like about streetscapes. And then there's actually hard figures on the value, that added value to the real estate value that trees bring to a street. So it's measurable. It's not even anecdotal. It's something we can actually say when we line the street with trees, we have increased rental value, increased real estate value, increased usability. So those are some of the things that. And I think it's one of those interesting things where anytime you see a tree-lined street, at least I know I do, I get kind of a little bit almost romantic about it. so when we do any of our work with form-based coder, we show images of tree-lined streets, and people uniformly say that's what we want to see our city to look like. So I think there's real advantages, and it's both in terms of just a emotive reaction and also the livability factor.
Thanks.
Yeah, and the other thing I think we talked about traffic patterns earlier. Again, this is just a broad general statement that I think we're back in the master transportation planning process. A significant amount of time was discussed, was spent talking about how important it is that we as a city and community become more engaged in the regional transportation conversations. And I think you guys have done a great job of getting us there and getting us towards those ends and means. And the reason I bring that up is because there was, a long time ago, a very serious discussion about where bikes want to go and where they should go. And access to Colchester, for example, coming through the bike path use, access to Essex being a huge question mark, and the handoff between Burlington and Winooski, and then through Colchester to Essex being very rough and challenged. And there's federal money sitting somewhere waiting to work on that corridor, as a matter of fact. So I think that'll be interesting too, as we start to play in those realms, to understand how Main Street, Weaver Street, and that connects to whatever's going to happen in the future in Colchester for potential access as well. Okay. Other questions, comments, concerns for Paul, Jesse, anybody in regards to the alternative plans? I think, as what was said earlier, it's a pretty challenging proposal to try to flip something on its head that has gone through a great process and has followed transportation master planning process and form-based code planning process from a streetscape and execution standpoint, because there's been a lot of thought put into this. But I do think it's been a really good exercise to show some potential focuses for the future, and it's great to see us jump right on, again, finding funding towards potential resolution on Weaver Street. That's a good outcome, and a good outcome of the public process too. Any other questions, concerns, or comments before I turn it over to public comment as well? Okay, we'll open it up to public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to weigh in on the council's consideration of accepting the recommendation that came from the Planning Commission to use what's described as alternative 1 in the alternatives comparisons for the Main Street Revitalization Project. There are a number of differences between the two, but Paul did a good job of summarizing, I think, in the beginning. I don't want to take away from that, but alternative 1 is, of course, with bike facilities being primarily located on Weaver Street, with sharrows and more green landscaping and hardscaping on Main Street, bus lane access a little easier, a number of items. Alternative 2 was with the dedicated two-way bike facility on Main Street, the win each way, no parking on one side of the street. And alternative 1 includes a roundabout, which everybody in Winooski gets excited about roundabouts. So with that, we'll open that up for comment for folks, and following that, council will do a quick deliberation, and then we'll take a vote on the issue. So this is an opportunity for public comment. Yes.
I guess I'll just say I live in a house of 2 people. We all bike every day to Burlington throughout the summer, and we are lucky enough that we live near Winooski Park. So if it was on Weaver Street, we'd probably use it. But all I can think about is people on the other side that are bike commuting, and they're not going to cross over. I can't imagine people would cross over Main to go use Weaver for that little section to get to access down to the roundabout. And what happens when you just assume people will go over, people are going to just use Main Street, and then it's not going to be as safe. And so I would advocate so much to have some type of dedicated bike lane on Main Street, because what you don't want is to build infrastructure and then have people use it incorrectly. I think we've seen that plenty in Burlington. I think bike lanes were convenient, and then people continue to just use that anyway. It happened on Pine Street years ago, and now they're trying to fix it. But Pine is terrifying to bike on it every day, because they can't fix it with colleges now.
Thank you. And I'll just, when there was original discussion, the handoff between the east side and centralized biking facilities was a huge discussion during the master transportation planning idea. And it's one of the big reasons why they chose Spring Street as the focus in lieu of the Fountain, which was interesting in a lot of people's estimations too, because of population centers. But that's what they arrived at, is it would be a more natural flow for people hopefully to switch over if we're going to have the main handoff between Winooski and Burlington be on the Weaver Street side, if that makes any sense. So that's a really good point, and one that came up a lot during the master transportation process. So regardless of which way we go here, that's that's going to be a critical issue. I don't know how we address that. Other comments? Public comment? Yes. And if you,
my name is Pete Burns. I'm a homeowner in Winooski, and I both drive and bike. And I feel like the alternative 2 with bike lanes is somewhat haphazardly created. Literally, as it was being presented last week, the engineers were trying to discuss options that were already problems rather than solving these problems. For instance, when somebody asked about why the bike lane was on the east side versus the west, there wasn't really a good answer, and it kind of seemed like they should put it there, but it had to be somewhere. When I asked about whether we would have an 8-foot wide bike lane instead of the 10-foot with the 3-foot buffer that they put in there, they said that in Vermont, 8 feet is acceptable. So why didn't they think of putting 8 feet in? And then it could have solved some of the problems that they were discussing, such as not enough room for street lighting in some of the areas. And then I'm also curious why there wasn't an alternative 3, and I don't know if that's what they were instructed to do, is just have 2 options, but there could have been an option, as somebody brought up in the meeting last time, that had a downhill Sharrow lane, but an uphill bike lane, because obviously people are going to be going in the bike slower up than when they're riding in the traffic downhill, and that would have freed up room on the street that maybe there still could have been some bike access. I don't want to sound rude to the engineers, but I just feel like the second option is almost just like an afterthought. At the January 10th meeting, there was a poll of the audience that asked the preferred mode of travel when we used the clickers, and 13% of people said bike. And right away on Main Street is 66 feet, and 13% of that is 8.5 feet. And a 8-foot bike lane would have been less than that, but we're not going to get any feet. And I drive too, I'm on Main Street all the time, so I appreciate all parts of it, and I walk too. So if the proposal that wins is alternative 1 with bike lanes on Weaver, I'm requesting that in every way possible, this gets expedited. And you guys were just talking about that, and I appreciate that. I just hope the Weaver Street bike lane is not a false promise to try to shut up the people who bike around town. And please consider people of all socioeconomic backgrounds bike, but for many people, who can't afford a car. This is their main form of transportation. And I just wanted to thank everybody involved with this, the people who don't get paid, the people who work for the city, and the engineers, that I do truly appreciate the time and effort and sacrifice you all put into this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comment? Going once. Thank you. And for those who didn't hear in the beginning of the meeting, we do ask that everybody please be sure to sign in. There's a sign-in sheet on the back prior to going. So just out of curiosity, from an alternative standpoint, was the focus on providing two different alternatives? Just to
That was the direction given by me, based on input from the earlier meeting, the local concerns meeting, where we heard really two things. One was alternative one, and the other was a dedicated bike facility on Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't hear input about another alternative, so taking our cue from that meeting directly, I will take full credit. I directed the engineers to look at two alternatives.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I mean, I think the point was to narrow down the number of issues that needed to be addressed from an alternative standpoint and try to identify what the best options for those key issues or linchpin issues might be, I would suppose. So, okay, open it up for questions, comments, concerns, and deliberation from council.
I guess just as a point of process, so between this step and the next step, if we move forward with a certain alternative, at what level does that lock us into those, you look at the street cut where it has the specific dimensions, kind of contrasting that to the point that Seth made at the beginning and looking at flexibility as we move forward with potential design or engineering. Are there still opportunities where we could look at, within the context of a general direction we're going in, would it be possible to include one dedicated lane, shrink a couple areas a certain amount, and just do a share-o on the other way? Or are we very much locked into, okay, now we're going with exactly what alternative one said?
I think there's probably two answers to that. The first is why we're doing this is to get to an early April date for an application for a grant proposal. And so we need to fix a number for that somehow, and we've got to get to that number. Exploring two options makes it difficult. It's double the work. So when we say we're doing alternative one, we're moving now with providing a price and preliminary engineering report for that alternative. Does that lock us into that design? Not at all. Once we get to that April date where we're applying for federal funds, I don't think it opens it up 100%, but it sort of reopens the floodgates, so to speak, because we will have applied for that money. We'll then be looking at a longer term period of design where we're really doing not only design development, but construction documents, so that we're at a point where we can actually think about constructability. And anytime you go from what we'll call preliminary design to design development, things will change. They always do. So I think that keeping an eye and an ear open to alternatives as we move forward is perfectly reasonable. But again, to get to the number, so to speak, so that we can have a reasonable or a relatively secure understanding of what we're trying to ask for federal and other kinds of funds. I think that's the goal for this phase, this preliminary engineering report phase, which is a 3 or 4 month period of time.
And it's a significant difference. I mean, it's $3 million,
right,
of a potentially between 18 and $21 million. And those are the initial figures just provided here. So,
but if we move forward with accepting the recommendation of alternative one tonight, that would not lock us out, or it wouldn't prohibit us from down the road looking at.
What I would say is when this body votes on something, we should understand that that's the marching order going forward. Because I think trying to keep the conversation thread open it can be a really challenging place. I mean, there can be spots in the process, I think is what Paul just said, but I think saying that it's going to continue to be this ongoing conversation point going forward is a really challenging place to put the process. I think when, again, you vote to approve one of these alternatives, the marching order and intent is go forward and execute that. It's not keep the door open, though, to change it in a significant way. And the $3 million difference, I would think, would have a pretty big swing in what the funders, how they look at an application and where you fill a $3 million gap if you decide to change your mind later.
You get a pool for that.
Actually, you need another 1.4. I mean, Paul, did I say anything incorrect?
No, that's right.
saying
I think the general impetus would be that we're moving forward with alternative one. Again, though, down the road, if there is, in the design development stage of things, if there's potential for things, we certainly can look at it. We can't preclude anything, but generally, I think we would move forward with the understanding that this is the general direction we're going right now.
So I do just feel, I mean, this project is a, once in a lifetime project in Winooski. It's a really big decision, and it does feel like there has been a ton of work that has gone into this project and this process before it has come here, but I feel like the discussion amongst the five of us right here and right now is pretty quick and maybe not respectful of how big of a decision that is in some ways, I guess I feel.
Yeah, well, what I'll maybe just say to that point is this is where I think as a community things get pretty hard. We've spent a number of the last few years in these visioning conversations, in these planning conversations, and kind of doing high level sketches of what the community is going to look like. And now when some of those things start unfolding and when the actions required and necessary, it's going to be hard because suddenly it's not let's incorporate everybody's views necessarily into each vision. We've tried to do that as best as we can and invested so much time and effort up front in those planning processes to try to coalesce around how can we make the majority of people here happy and pleased. And with these decisions, they're going to start coming at us, I think, pretty fast and furious as we're starting to see. That's going to be a really hard thing, and it's not going to be something where after every decision, probably the body's going to feel like we got to dedicate every second that we wish we could towards it. So I appreciate that and I understand it. I also challenge us, though. I do think I've said it a couple times here that we have spent a significant amount of time planning and taking public feedback, and some of these projects with timelines now have the opportunity to go, and we've got some people now working here and on staff that are capable of pushing some of those forward. So there's good opportunity there too. And not to discount what you said at all, because it is difficult trying. But
if I can just add to that, I think it is a really hard. You guys are in a really hard position tonight because it is a very big decision. The only other thing I'd add is that this has been a community process over years through the form-based code discussions and the master planning conversations. It's also been conversations on many of the last planning commissions and public works commission agendas, which I, as designed, are kind of the policy extensions of you all. So while it feels challenging because it's not necessarily your group to be having discussions at, they are your representatives to those discussions. And there was a really wonderful, I thought, conversation between the Public Works Commission and the Planning Commission to get to this recommendation to you last Wednesday night. And as we move forward with new council assignments to commissions in March, or through the master planning process, thinking about how we want to task the commissions with doing work, I think these are important value conversations to keep in mind. How do we how do we send them work and give it back and get it back in a way that we can respond quickly and be nimble and whatnot, because it feels hard.
Yeah, and I think, I mainly say that not in context of feeling uncomfortable moving forward tonight, but just in recognition for folks who might be watching at home or for the public that we hear this has been a challenging conversation for individuals for multiple reasons, and it's challenging for us. Those same discussions are difficult.
Other comments, questions, concerns? Council?
I appreciate the fact that the Public Works Commission and the Planning Commission did so much work to get us here on a number of fronts. And so I feel like it is our obligation to respect the process that we created. Even though.
And we asked for.
And that we asked for, even though we might not have, we could collect the same information, have the same discussions, but that sort of does a disservice to the folks that have spent a lot of hours doing work that we tasked them to do, so.
I didn't stick around for the end of that meeting the other night, but you said it was a unanimous vote from the Public Works and?
No, not from Public Works. Public Works did not take an official vote. They made recommendations. Planning Commission did vote and was unanimous in favor.
Gotcha.
And I would say the Public Works traditionally tries to work on consensus, and the consensus was alternative one, and I think had there been a vote, there likely would have been a vote against, but ultimately a vote in favor.
And I'll just say that the language was also very much let's try to balance this, and let's try to be very aggressive about whatever non-structural methodologies we can use to ensure that biking is still safe on Main Street. That's what I certainly, that was my impression of what I heard come out of people, is like, yes with a but. And I think we've kind of hammered on that tonight already, so I won't go back through it.
And also from those discussions then, and just now getting back to, we're talking about a lot of the nuances, but in general, I heard a lot of excitement from people, and I think that there's probably a lot of excitement from me in moving forward in such an amazing project, so.
Oh, I'm having flashbacks to crosswalks in a circulator. Any further comments, questions from council?
I do just have to say on the Rotary thing, I'm like a little.
I didn't mean to reopen that.
Worried about that with capacity issues and the crosswalks. I get the idea that they're pushed back further from the actual crossing, and then the fact that there is going to be biking on Main Street, I feel like that is challenging, as well as with maintenance around snow cleanup in the roundabout. I hope that we look at the regular crossing option in the design phase as well. I just want to say that clearly. Again, I love the idea that it could potentially keep the flow going, but it's all the other stuff that worries me.
What about a rotary between every bump out?
Okay.
Now you're giving vibes.
Any other constructive or productive comments or questions from council?
Probably not.
Okay. So seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval of the Main Street revitalization project with the proposal tonight, the alternative one, what will be known as alternative one, as recommended by the Planning Commission, be accepted.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Brian Sweeney, second by Brian Corrigan. Any further comments or discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work. Thank you, everybody, for all of your engagement on the issue. Very appreciated. And for those that did not hear too, we're hearing an item in a moment about getting funding for researching bike facilities for Weaver Street, so hold on. Okay, item B, approval, Main Street Revitalization Project approval of agreement with CCRPC or the Chinon County Community Regional Planning Commission to support scoping and preliminary design.
So this, you've heard about this before. This is our attempt to leverage as many outside dollars as we can onto this project. So CCRPC came to the table with $50,000 in funds for design and scoping of the Main Street project to cover expenses not otherwise covered by the State Revolving Loan Fund or the USDA funds. So it does require a 20% match, so it's a $50,000 grant. Our match is 10%. And we will be using FY18 existing street reconstruction dollars for this match.
Great. 20%, $10,000.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
What did I say?
I think you said 10%.
Oh, sorry.
Just
20%,
for the
$10,000 match. Yes. Thank you.
Any questions, concerns, comments? Terms are before you as well. Seeing, hearing none. Any questions, concerns, comments from the public? Hearing, seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries.
So there was no motion.
We haven't made a motion yet.
Oh, whoa, oh. I'm sorry. All right, I would entertain a motion for approval of the Main Street Revitalization Project agreement with the CCRPC to support scoping and preliminary design. Motion by Nicole, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. I know Chief's giving a presentation later. I'm just excited for it. Item C, approval, Chinon County Regional Planning Commission FY19 Unified Planning Work Program request for funding.
So this is the agenda item I referenced earlier. So Chinon County Regional Planning Commission does an annual process where they solicit work ideas from their member communities. It's called their Unified Planning Work Program, UPWP. So the communities in Chinon County submit their requests for support and technical assistance. CCRPC then goes through a review and vetting process. Funds are awarded. The work continues the next fiscal year. So for example, the last agenda item you just approved was actually reassignment of FY18 dollars they had available to this project. Last year we did not apply for funds and haven't applied for many funds in the past. So they reached out to us. Ryan Lambert and I went and met with them, reviewed the projects we had in mind, got support for these 6 that are before you tonight. With your permission, we will submit the applications for these this week. We'll then go through this process with them where we'll vet these projects. There could be a negotiation where they decide to phase or fund at different levels, but that's a process that we can undertake with them. And then if awarded, we will commit to coming up with the required match if there is any. So just very quickly, the 6 projects we're proposing are number 1, the Weaver Street bike facility improvement scoping process. So that will be actual preliminary design for what that bike facility looks like. That would require a 20% match, and we would build that into the Main Street Revitalization Project budget. The second project we're talking about is a study of transportation impact fees. Your council has had several conversations about the use of impact fees. We don't currently use them. Other communities in our region do. So what would that look like in Winooski? What would we need to put in place to implement those impact fees, a proposed ordinance, etc. That would require a $10,000 match, and if that project were approved, we would come to you with a request to use reserve funds to do that work, since those impact fees could impact the full budget. The third is a East Allen scoping study. We are starting to see development up East Allen Street as we are on Main Street, seeing some conflicts similar to Main Street, developers looking for better bike and pedestrian access. So this would be kind of that preliminary look at what those kind of streetscape improvements look like. We do have a lot of real estate on East Allen, so hopefully could do some pretty creative things. This one's unique in that it is a very large project and likely a multi-year project, so that would probably be part of the negotiation with CCRPC. It's also unique because it's Route 15. It is considered a regional project and not a Winooski project. So there is no local match required for that effort. The fourth is to have CCRPC support us with our master planning process. We have been in talks with them to do this for a while. They have all of our GIS data, have extraordinary mapping capabilities. Because they know they will support us on this project, they asked us to just get it on their official work plan. We can use up to $10,000 of the municipal planning grant award we got to match to these dollars if we move forward in that direction. And then Ryan Lambert is also putting in requests for update to some of our traffic count data throughout the city. So CCRPC in the summer often does traffic counts, as well as an update of some pavement condition index reports. So what streets meet what PCI levels. So they will do that assessment, feed us the data, and then that will inform our capital improvement planning processes. There is no local match for either of those submittals. That was really fast.
Well, given that they're
We've talked about them a lot.
basically proposals for
Projects
proposals
we've talked
to be considered for funding in a larger scope, that's absolutely fine. Other questions, concerns for Jesse? I mean, these are all supporting efforts, again, that we were working on extensively, almost every meeting and week. And then I think just to speak to it, I mean, this is us trying really hard to keep up with the results of a lot of the really positive steps that have been taken, and running hard to keep up with that. It's going to require some patience from folks. Things, I mean, to the point about the pool discussion taking a couple of years, don't move as fast as we always want them to, but this is really positive steps to address some concerns that I think we all recognize exist.
And also using resources that aren't necessarily solely tax dollars. I mean, we are extraordinarily to have CCRPC right in the city with this expert talent on staff. Let's make the most of those resources. You know, we can't have a team of 5 engineers here on staff, so let's make sure we use the ones we have in the city as well as we can.
Questions, comments, concerns from council? Questions, comments, concerns from the public? Okay, so seeing and hearing none, I would entertain a motion for the Chinon County Regional Planning Commission FY19 Unified Planning Work Program requests for funding.
So move.
Motion by Brian Corrigan, second by Nicole. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. Okay, we're gonna take a 3-minute recess. We will resume at just a bit after 7:18. with discussion of the FY19 budget with public safety.
Good evening. Thanks for having us. Excited to be here for yet another budget process.
But your first one is officially fire chief?
Yes. First one kind of a consolidated look for me, so it's been a learning experience for sure. And kind of excited to be here and kind of get it out there. So the organizational chart with some of our most recent changes cleans it up a little bit. I think all of us have, over the last couple of years, have seen different iterations of this. This is includes fire, our fire marshals, and our code enforcement folks. Kind of, I hope we all would agree that this is much cleaner, a little simpler to understand. So a few key outcomes for FY17 is responded to 387 fire calls. That's about average for us right now. There's over the last 3 to 5 years, that's where we've been hovering with very small increases. The building permits remain pretty steady. In future years, I hope to tie some value to those building permits, because it'd be pretty interesting to understand what the investment here in the community with those, whether it's property maintenance or new development, it'd be a pretty impressive number. Inspections, we did 551 units. Those are the certificates of fitness that we issued for that district. And then we're up to 93 commercial units out of about 135 that we know of businesses. We came to you a couple years ago and started that, so we continue to try to get that part of the inspection program up to speed. Some strategic vision accomplishments for last year. It was exciting to work with Heather and overall the city leadership team and look at how we play a role in the economic development world. We've all kind of assumed that we're tied. I think this, for me, was the first year that I felt pretty accomplished in being able to provide some of the information I knew was there. Necessarily didn't have a place to put it. And with Heather coming on board, I think that will pay dividends to the city going forward. Again, our cross-functionality we've been at this table a lot and spoke about, and I think it's starting to pay off. A lot of us draw different data points, and it's pretty exciting when you can share that information and have them very excited about it and see the kind of the fruit of that labor of collecting that data. So the new fee structures for the permits goes along with our with the ordinance and the kind of bringing the fee section of that up to date. And we moved all the fire department asset management and trucks and equipment to Firehouse software. You're gonna hear us talk a lot about Firehouse. So previously, it was pretty fractured of what equipment the fire department had, what our equipment is, where it is, how much it cost us for maintenance, to purchase it, to maintain it, and start to really control our assets as far as to develop a capital improvement plan. We need to understand the shelf life on some of that equipment. Firehouse will be huge in doing that. Implementation of the Firehouse, the back office. Again, we've just been spending any spare moment, if you will, in putting our data in there. We have a lot of the back office, as I'm calling it. As Jess mentioned, the Firehouse folks are here for the next 2 days working with us. Today was the first day again that we've been able to really look at all the data we've put into it and start to understand what we can do with it, and put it to work on the iPads and really start to understand what that is. And it's when I am able to get back here and do a presentation, I believe you'll be pretty impressed with what that will do for this city moving forward. What excites me about it is it stays here when folks leave. It's part of what I'm trying to rebuild is a loss of a ton of institutional knowledge. And I think any good organization needs to understand it's not about any one person. It's about building a system that can remain here and work for the city. So again, it would be huge in doing that. Life safety, and we continue to do station tours. We conducted our first fire safety, we're calling it, program, and we did that in the industrial park. About 40 to 45 people attended. We did fire extinguishers and a sprinkler demonstration. It was huge, very well received. It's going to be a huge relationship builder with the businesses. The senior center meet and greets are great. The cross functionality through Firehouse, again, PD, fire code, economic development, we're all connected at this point. It's huge. Participated and monitored the activity and efforts moving forward to the consolidated dispatch model. That's going to take quite a bit of our time moving forward as that moves. And with the new leadership, just really starting to reach out with our partners. That was important to us, all of them are, but especially St. Mike's as they do our medical in the Air Guard and what they do for us and other mutual aid agreements. Goals for FY19 in the strategic vision is, evaluate the current inspection points, our known issues. We've had a long-standing inspection program, and through education, professional development with the staff, we need to work diligently to keep pace with the demands of what's changing in the community. Every year it seems like we're dealing with a different subject matter that, and they seem to be getting more and more technical. There's more and more resources for folks, which is great. Whether it's Vermont Legal Aid or Vermont Tenants or the health department, it's all great things, but we need to keep pace with that too. We have some work ahead of us. The capital improvement plan for fire apparatus, we're going to talk about that a little bit further. The replacement of the 1991 rescue pumper we're going to talk about in one of the other slides. It's taken a huge amount of our time right now. It's on the top of my list, on our list. So we'll see that again in the next slide, I believe. Continue with the Firehouse software, not only its implementation, but look at how we're going to keep it up to date. It's not something we can just stop once we feel the data's in it. The data changes every year, whether it's change of ownership, change of occupancy, new units. We need to learn how to keep that up to date. The Housing Commission, I suspect we're trying to gear up. I'm trying to gear up for that. I think it would be great as the Housing Commission starts to understand and get through its process of identifying concerns, and so us keeping up to speed with that and then being prepared to leverage our reserve funds to support helping folks address some of those concerns. Heather will play a key role in that moving forward. Create initial community risk reduction plan. I am scheduled to go to the National Fire Academy and do a 10-day class in Maryland, which will, at the end of that 10 days, I will have created an initial risk reduction plan in regards to life safety. I think that will be a huge roadmap from our department, including the fire department and code enforcement and public safety as a whole moving forward. It is the trend nationally to really start to turn our attention there. It's a lot like the community policing. This is that piece in the life safety fire code enforcement world. Pretty excited to be doing that. Continue to evaluate our fire delivery model, both locally and with partners. Certainly been dealing with getting my feet on the ground, having done a lot of the administrative pieces of it, but now being in the operational pieces of it, we're right in the thick of it, starting to evaluate that and assure that moving forward, we have a plan of what that model is, that delivers the service that's expected within the budget that's given and approved. Partners are going to be huge. I'm a big advocate of working with our partners. They have a lot of the same needs. We have a lot of the same needs as them. None of us are big enough to do this alone, so we'll continue to look into that. Just touch base briefly. Expand the leadership opportunities through professional development, and that is, just like every other department here, is making sure that the officers in the fire department and the leadership and code enforcement is up to date on the most national trends. And budgetary changes, fire equipment is top on the list. Our current fire apparatus, and I'm talking about here, is our 2 engines, not the aerial. One is 24 years old and the 26-year-old truck. The 26-year-old truck is the 1991 Sutphen that's referred to here. We bought it used. That truck has been out of service for the past 3 months. So that is forcing us to rely on the 24-year-old engine. I think we were a lot more comfortable when we had 2 old trucks to depend on. To be with one is not all that comfortable. We take very good care of our equipment, but it's wear and tear, it's age, and we're right in the... We've waited too long. We needed a plan prior to this, so it's accelerated our need with having that truck out of service. Is really putting the worry and the pinch on our operations. So we really need to continue on the road we are through the current plan of that replacement of that 1991. I think we have a solid plan in doing that. You want me?
Yeah, so we'll get into this more next week at the CIP meeting, but to foreshadow that and remind you what you heard in the budget presentation. So the plan is, because we have not been building up CIP reserves to fund a truck for several years, and this is really a very emergent need for a new apparatus, we are making the recommendation that we use the leasing model the city has used under other significant big purchases through Public Works in the last couple of years, dedicate a very significant portion of this year's CIP funding to a down payment on a truck, paired with a request for $100,000 from FY17 fund balance. So essentially pay for half the truck now and then lease it for 12 years, which would be kind of an annual, it wouldn't be technically debt payment, it would be that lease payment to the end of the 12-year term, at which point we would own a 12-year-old truck rather than purchasing a used truck. So you'll hear more about that next week, but that's the general concept.
The rental registry, the small increases in the revenue lines as other units have come on. It's barely keeping pace with the increases in our salaries, that sort of thing, but it is doing it. We continue to be able to put a small amount into the reserves. Right now, the reserve fund is over $50,000, I believe we're estimating. And again, that's where Heather comes in as the Housing Commission identifies priorities for needs. We're hoping to turn back to this reserves and figure out some sort of loan program or whatever that may end up being to help people through that piece. And it would be specific to quality, I suspect, quality of life issues. If we're successful with the new truck, we will reduce the equipment maintenance by $10,000. Part of what we want to get away from, and what you see sometimes when you have old equipment, is we tend to budget for catastrophic failures. As we have surplus funds, sometimes is where that comes from. If I think, the 24-year-old truck I know needs $15,000 worth of pump work. So, do we do that in our operating? It's not a really reoccurring operating expense. That really should be a capital line item. So you're going to see us be able to start to really budget for true operating things and look to the capital for, if there's a catastrophic failure and a $15,000 repair to a pump, I don't want to carry that year to year. I want to be able to go to reserves and make that repair. The code, this is fire and code kind of put together this year, so I may have to look to Angela for some clarity. This is the roll-up. The one big one that stood out for me here is the contract professional services line item. You see that's it's down quite a bit. And that's with zoning coming out. If you look in FY18, it's about 100,000. We're projecting 31.8. Again, zoning came out of that. We were carrying that as we didn't hire the zoning administrator that year. We tucked it in here so we could do a contract for those services, which we did. Obviously now we've hired, so that's coming out and going into that department's budget. This 31.8 accounts for our ongoing contract with Comp Plus, mainly Comp Plus, which is our parking software collection software, that contract with them. The rental registry, the top portion is again the small increase in revenues, if you will, the other units that are going to be coming on board. And then the expense line items rolled up. Again, one that stood out for me was the miscellaneous on the bottom. That includes the general fund transfer that we usually anticipate. And then I believe there's some salary contingencies in there, Jess. In that line item. So emerging issues, we're currently with the engine replacement. We land that. I want to immediately get going on the ladder truck replacement. And when I say immediately, I'm talking about the planning process. I'm not worried currently about the age of our aerial. We have some time. When you go and spec a piece of equipment like this, especially an aerial and the operational changes that probably will come with it, meaning whether it's a platform or a ladder or that sort of thing, it's going to take us a couple to 3 years to plan and really spec, and we'll have a better understanding of what the development along Main Street is going to look like. Again, there's some evaluation to do on whether it's a 100-foot truck to address the length of the truck. But again, we'll be able to evaluate the size of the truck. If we go to a longer ladder, does it become a dual axle truck? Does it remain a single axle? That's not something we can answer overnight. So I want to start into that process. Staffing levels, recruitment and training are huge. We're currently, running some ads for part-time folks, trying to get the numbers shored up. We're not super low on numbers. We're average, but I would like to get on the higher end of our numbers towards 20 members. We're currently in a process to fill our vacant lieutenant spot. We're in a process for that, so I think we're in a good place with that. Start to look at our facilities. Again, it's not unlike other departments here. As the demands go up on fire, it's not just Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, that there's needs for fire and rescue personnel. So what are we going to do in the future? What's that model? Currently, we don't have sleeping quarters. Currently, we don't have 2 bathrooms. just start that planning process and start to collect that data. Regional dispatch is going to be huge. It's going to take some time for us to to put in for the operational changes around what that all means. There'll be a huge learning curve if that goes, having been through one. And then keeping pace with the complexity of the code and quality of life issues. I touched on that a few minutes ago. Over the last couple of years, the issues are getting more and more complex. There's a lot more issues between landlords and tenants, whether it's in our realm or whether it remains civil. It takes a lot of time sometimes to figure that out. We get a property complaint, and sometimes once you start to dig into it, you realize there's an eviction. Because there's an eviction, where does that leave us with dealing with the code issue? So there's a lot of complexities, and it's not just as simple as saying it's civil, you need to go deal with it. There is a level of involvement for the city. Sometimes it just takes some time to sort that out. And we never want to close the door on someone who has an issue, in my opinion. I think we've proven over and over and over that that's not who we are here in the city. That's not who we want to be. We try to bear all resources. So.
Do you want to pause here? And move
Yeah, see if there's questions for John while it's fresh. Could you, just for we keep saying trucks, pumper trucks, ladder trucks.
Yep.
Could you differentiate for the public at home what we're looking at this year and what sort of longer term from an apparatus standpoint, just so people have a picture of that?
Yep. So in the fire world, there's what we refer to as pumper trucks. So that's usually the first truck out of the firehouse. Carries anywhere from 6 to 8 people. Has a large pump. That's typically what would connect to the fire hydrant, and most of your hoses would be pulled off. It's our first due truck. It's our first toolbox, if you will, out of the firehouse. It is the workhorse of the firehouse. It's out on every fire call, every accident, every elevator emergency, whatever it is. That's the first truck out. Those typically have a 30-year. NFPA says after 30 years they're not recognized within our ISO ratings and certifications, so they do have a shelf life. I'm pretty impressed that we're at 26 and 24. I could take you to our 24-year-old truck that we've owned all of its life. That's the yellow truck for those that don't know it, and that truck is in super shape. We should be very proud of what staff has done to keep that truck in service. Could take you to many firehouses with trucks half that shelf life, and they're nowhere near that shape. When we talk about an aerial, it's the aerial device, the ladder device. In our case, it's a 75-foot platform. Again, I'm not so worried about its age right now, but as we have new development and even some of the existing development, when the redevelopment was done downtown, it's a fine line. We truly do need a 100-foot aerial device here minimum. That does pose some challenges for us as we start to get out into some of the neighborhoods, the West Street area, the Hickok Street area. Get a 100-foot truck, it starts to get longer, bigger. They're harder to drive, they're harder to maneuver. And again, part of that planning for us is, I'm going to refer to a Burlington fire where there was the Torrey Hall fire. There was 3 other devices already there, but those trucks could not get to where that fire was because of their size. Our truck was able to get in there and get to where it needed to be and really assist with putting that fire out. So there's a lot of discussion to be had with our partners Burlington has a 100-foot truck just across the bridge. Colchester has a 100-foot. How do we remain 75 to 80 foot and let them do the 100-foot aerial work? There's a lot of planning and some risk analysis to do there. Along with that goes staffing. I would love to back a 100-foot aerial truck in there today. The fact of the matter is, it's a staffing issue right now. So,
nimble and scrappy truck for nimble and scrappy town.
so it serves Winooski very well, and that comes with a balance.
And you threw the acronym out there. It's in the past been a big point of discussion because we're a 3 instead of a 4. You can correct me as soon as I finish this statement. But people too often wonder about this equipment only when there's an emergency that impacts their lives. But it's a reminder that the equipment also helps the ratings on the ISO, which then actually determines what people pay in their insurance on a monthly basis for their homeowners insurance.
Absolutely. This is, it's a system. It's the equipment, it's the number of people, it's the training, it's our inspection program, it's our water, availability, through our water department, it's the maintenance that they do, it's the dispatchers, it's all a system. And if we lack points in an area, we may be able to make it up somewhere else. That's on paper. And in reality, again, that risk analysis needs to be done. Are we willing to accept that risk that, there are buildings that we can't reach with our current truck, but those buildings are typically sprinklered, and we know where our mutual aid is and plan accordingly. Again, that's the planning, and there's some community involvement to be had there, some community discussions to be had there.
Thank you, John. Other questions, concerns for John on the fire portion?
Just a quick question about rental registry stuff, and it doesn't really have to do with the budget, but it's just top of mind. It looks like there's some discussions happening at state level about like a statewide rental registry potentially. So are we keeping an eye on that and looking at how that might affect how we operate a rental registry?
So there are a few communities that currently have a MOU with the state. We have an MOU. We are a leg of the state of Vermont. That's how we do business. So essentially, our MOU is with the Division of Fire Safety. The commissioner allows us to do our MOU. South Burlington has it. Burlington has it. I believe what the state is doing is there's huge gaps. I'm going to use East Montpelier because I'm very familiar with that. There's zero code enforcement, zero rental registry stuff in the town of East Montpelier. There's just no one there that does it. And that's the gaps that they're trying to fill.
So we're already participating. They're looking at expanding to other.
That's how I understand that.
So I think we'd actually be very well positioned to assist other municipalities because we already have the structures in place from a staffing, from an expertise, from a software, from a technology standpoint, that we could, depending on how the state legislation goes, which I think is a pretty big question mark at this point, we could look to other communities to provide that service for them. I think the more we talk about regionalization, the chief brought up a good point about the tower trucks and the height and how we're looking at that from a regional perspective. The same could be done with a rental registry where we use our infrastructure to support other communities. So I think we are very well positioned to be competitive if that legislation moves forward.
Great. For
those of us that with it, obviously it's pretty important for our daytime coverage here in the city of Winooski, as it is in others. It's a way that municipalities have gotten people here to answer emergency calls while doing this type of work. There's a direct connection.
And a lot of the statewide discussion right now is if they can provide enough carrots to other communities to not oppose this. And one place just to encourage ourselves and staff to continue developing those tools is cities that have internal funding mechanisms to support this kind of work. For example, if you've got a revolving loan fund that addresses issues that people have, we're going to be in a great position to pair and bounce off of potential state projects that come along, and we'll assuredly have some sort of prioritization because of a forward commitment on that type of work. So, I don't know, watching that legislation, I think that's really important for us to think about. It's great to know that you guys are thinking about that and talking about it going forward, because it'll inevitably give us more access to more money, which is great to help the people who are trying to do right, trying to stay in compliance.
We're very well positioned. Even today on the phone with Division of Fire Safety, whether I'm trying to get an issue dealt with here in the city, oftentimes they call us and say, how do you guys deal with this? So I think we're positioned pretty well.
Great, thanks.
Before we move, if I can just say, I think one of the themes you're hearing throughout the chief's presentation is really this commitment to staff professional development, professionalization of the service, to bringing the fire department into the city of Winooski. I think historically there was a kind of us and them sense, and where the chief is really modeling it, and Chief Spittle as well, modeling the connection between the fire department and the city. And I give them a lot of credit for changing some of that culture at the fire department. I think it's really moving in a positive direction with investment in new equipment, investment in new safety trainings, having our employees feel safe and supported by the city, and professionalization through policies and development and whatnot. So thank you to the chief. He's being a bit humble about what he's doing.
Other questions, comments regarding the fire portion of the budget? We'll pause to any public questions or comments regarding the fire portion of the public safety budget. We're going to move into police now as well, but there's an opportunity for anything on fire. Okay. All right, you're up, Chief Number 2.
So what you're looking at is our organizational chart. This has remained fairly static for the past 3.5 years. This is going to be a really important year for the police department. We've had some really unexpected changes within the police department. Obviously, we lost Lieutenant Graham in December. Lieutenant McGivern is retiring June 1st. Sergeant Wood is retiring January 28th. So a lot of opportunity. I like to consider them opportunities more than challenges. I think we have some excellent staff downstairs and we'll be able to make a transition. It's just going to involve a lot of change over the next year. So I'll talk a little bit more about that organizational chart and how we're going to possibly be changing that later in the presentation. Fy17 Key Outcomes. We assigned a domestic violence investigator to the Chinon County State's Attorney Office to assist in investigating county-wide domestic cases. So the goal of that grant was to increase conviction rates and also better assist victims that went to court and to help them along through the process. So it was a really great opportunity. James Leonard was assigned to that while it lasted, and I feel he came back a much better, well-rounded employee for having that opportunity. We participated a little over 2 years, and then due to some staffing issues here, we had to pull him out of that grant a little bit early, but I do feel it was a great learning experience for him. We also assigned Detective Tacuzzi a little over 2 years ago. Again, great opportunity for James Charcalis, who's been assigned there due to staffing issues. And some other things that you'll see later in the presentation, we've decided that we're not going to continue that assignment. So he'll be coming back February 1st. Detective Adams was assigned to the DEA task force to assist with local and federal drug investigations. This is a really important piece as far as I'm concerned because it really brings a whole level of services to the city that we wouldn't be able to handle on our own. And having somebody actually assigned to and involved in that task force gives us direct access to a lot of resources for prolonged investigations that we probably wouldn't have if we didn't have that connection. And the important part of that task force is we absolutely depend on asset forfeiture to fund continuing investigations as new investigations pop up. So it's a really key assignment that we don't ever really want to give up because it allows us to continue better services to the city without an actual impact on the taxpayers. We're continuing the community policing model the best we can with our staffing issues. We've done multiple barbecues, coffee with a cop. We do mindful mentors at the school. On Tuesdays, we spend an hour with 2nd to 5th graders, and we do a mindfulness exercise along with some type of physical activity for an hour. So it's really great relationship building that we're able to do up there. We also hosted de-escalation training. It's a big topic nationally that police officers are learning that it's okay to back up, take a minute, and try and de-escalate something rather than just the traditional stay in control of every second of things that are uncontrollable sometimes. The next 3 bullet points, I'll throw credit to Eli for the Community Justice Center, but they served 140 individuals and families throughout the Community Justice Center. They held 10 community justice community forums, and they also leveraged over 700 hours of volunteer time working for the Community Justice Center.
Wow.
And he can speak more to that later. FY18 accomplishments. Again, the Community Justice Center does an amazingly good job working with the safe reentry of residents through the Community Justice Center. So some of these people that they work with are people that aren't necessarily always welcomed in a community. And Eli does a great job assisting these people to come out and be productive, active, welcome members of our community, which I think is really important. Under Safe, Healthy, and Connected People, we continued our partnership with the Burlington's Opioid Project. Again, this isn't something that's specific to Winooski. This is a statewide problem. We're trying to get our hands around this and help people that have become dependent on drugs for whatever path they went down, whether it was prescription drugs or just having a taste for illegal drugs, but trying to pull them out of that lifestyle. Several Narcan deployments to assist in saving lives prior to EMS. I did not run exact numbers. If I was to estimate, I'd say we've done about 40 deployments in the field over the past year. We hosted several community outreach events, which I mentioned earlier. We worked across city departments to address quality of life issues, worked very closely with John, the code enforcement department. Parking, I think just overall communication within the city has improved dramatically over the past 2 or 3 years, and we really try to work on things collaboratively rather than in our own silos like we used to. We also recently completed, and this was a citywide for one of these trainings, unconscious bias training session. Again, another pretty interesting topic. All full-time city employees and most part-time participated in this. And then shortly after, it was unconscious training for the better part of 2 weeks for the police department. It was a one-day training, but then the following week, a national course became available to the South Burlington Police Department for supervisors, so all of the police department supervisors also attended that class. Goals for FY19, again, to continue the good work that Eli and his crew does back there at the Community Justice Center. As I alluded to, we're going to have a tremendous amount of openings and movement, and that's just the expected ones. There's always something that comes up that you weren't expecting. We would love to try and diversify our workforce to be more reflective of our community. It's not easy work. It's an incredibly competitive field to get people to come into police work. At any point in time, there's an average of 100 openings in the state of Vermont right now. And as much as we work collaboratively together when we need to, it's also a competition to try and attract the best people to your police department. So it's a challenge. And then not only are you looking for people to fill those roles, but when you're trying to diversify too, it just gets incrementally harder and harder as you go. So we're going to work on that, and we're going to try and come up with better ways to try and build people up, possibly start a Police Explorer program and identify young people and get them interested in police work, and try getting them part-time certified as these full-time certified openings come up, and try and have them already on staff. We're going to develop and work closely with the community outreach team. Later in the budget presentation, you're going to see a request for a $12,300 ad. I'll get a little bit more into that, but the basic premise behind this is that the city managers really fast-tracked this project, and they've listened to the police chief's concerns throughout Chinon County that a great number of hours is devoted to dealing with people that are just in crisis all the time, whether it's drugs, mental health, or a combination of both. Really not a great system to have in place. Police officers responding to people having the absolute worst day of their lives, and our options are very limited if they, threaten to hurt themselves or us. So having a go-between, an actual outreach team of mental health workers that will come to the city and be available to us is a really great tool. And again, I will get into a little bit more detail when we actually get to the budget slide of that presentation. We'd like to focus on career development for the current employees to prepare for all of this change. I believe we do have a tremendous amount of people downstairs that are ready to step up, but it's going to involve a continuing education, certifications, and just giving them access to things outside of Winooski to try and better themselves and be ready for those roles. We're always trying to strengthen relationships across several groups within our community. There's many communities within our community, so we're going to work hard to try and identify different people that are respected within those communities and try and build some relationships and do some non-traditional outreach and possibly go have lunch, you know, have a certain get together that will focus on certain groups, or go to a gathering that they're having and just take part in something that they're doing. And we're well within our way of completing at least the pillars of the 3-year strategic plan, so I feel that we're right on track where you had expected us to be at this point in the year. Budgetary changes, we've been without a grand juror for amount of time. We were lucky enough to have 2 people on the Public Safety Commission who were qualified and able to take that position for a while. Due to retirement, they're not able to continue. So Jesse and I have been working, and John as well, to try and fill that role with somebody who's local. We think we're pretty close to doing that. So we'll be able to have a grand juror back in place to hear parking complaints, but to also handle any criminal VCOs, so city ordinance tickets that go down to court. Part of that process is their right to due process, which could actually go all the way up to a jury trial for a city ordinance violation. Thankfully, the workload for that has actually gone down dramatically, because the number of the violations that we write now actually go to the reparative board to try and keep people from having a criminal record. So it's really not that many cases that actually go to court anymore. Community Justice Fund, Eli's going to come up and speak to this later. One of the major concerns, and we've said this, and I'm sure Steve said it before I did, revenue is primarily from a grant from the Department of Corrections. They never complete their budget process in line with our budget process, so we're presenting you our best guess. Angela does a great job of looking into her crystal ball and telling us what we think we're going to get, but that usually isn't given to us until June. So it's really, we're going to provide the services that we believe we can provide and hope that we get the money to continue to do that. And the leadership proposal is going to be that we're going to maintain current staffing levels. One of the things that you'll see on this slide is that Margaret, under the eliminate the Community Justice Center match, which is a $13,000, $752 item that's in the police department, is the reparative board manager. She hosts and manages, she does what Patty Niquette used to do. She hosts all of the reparative boards. And from what I understand, the reasoning behind that being in the police budget is that if the grant money ever dried up and went away, we could still have a reparative process in the city of Winooski that we didn't have to depend on the state's grant funding. So we're hoping that will continue. And the level tax rate budget that you got, it was a cut. The leadership proposal, we've asked to put that back in. As I alluded to earlier, we're pulling back an officer from Cousy. We're hoping to have that fee offset by the provided financial support, the bookkeeping, and issuing of the payroll that we've taken on. And we're going to reduce part-time staff hours. Obviously, we're hoping that with an extra body here, 40 hours a week, that we can reduce part-time need for staffing in the part-time line item and offset that cost. We level funded police overtime, so we didn't add the cost of living increases to try and maintain that cost. Again, I'm pretty comfortable with that number. It's not a lot of money, and having one extra officer here for 40 hours a week, we should be able to easily cover that $3,000. Other expenses, I really looked at, where I could help when we were devising this budget and try and make it responsible for the taxpayers. And we have body-worn cameras. We have a replacement plan. We've put some good systems in place. And the second part B of that plan, I guess, was going to be doing the same thing with a system that was very similar, but in-car cameras, but they were cloud-based, have built-in replacement costs in a 5-year contract. That's what that $2,000 is. So we've put that on the cuts. I do believe, you know, we are not alone. There are several departments that just have body-worn cameras and don't have that second perspective in the windshield. In a perfect world, and if money was no option, of course, we would love to have that. But in years where you're trying to save money and make sure you're making responsible decisions, it seemed like it was a reasonable request. And then the last thing is investing in the community outreach team. So what this is going to involve is 5 full-time social mental health workers, 4, that are going to be available to 7 communities? 6, I was close. Great resource to have. So at any point in time, the great thing about this, right, is if there's nothing going on in some other communities, you could have literally 4 mental health workers. You would hope that we never would need that many at one time, but if the need did arise, we could potentially have 4 people here helping us with a situation. So they're going to be embedded in each police department. We're going to have some office space and a computer, a telephone for them to use. And for a $12,000, $300 investment, you couldn't even hire a quarter person for that if we did it on our own. But by joining forces and sharing money and expense, we're going to get this great resource for $12,300. I think it's an absolute no-brainer. All right, on to the fun stuff. So I'm just going to hit some highlights, and if this is too detailed, you can just tell me, Rick, this is too much. If it's not, if you feel free to stop me. But because we're one of the larger budgets in the city, I feel the need to explain these numbers a little bit. The salaries line item, line 1, includes part-time and full-time salaries, overtime, and also holiday pay for officers. Now, some of this number going up was due to the fact that we were operating off of a 2-year expired police contract, and it's expiring again June 30th, so we're going to be back at the table doing this again. But it exponentially affected every, FY16, 17. It touched all 3 and created the number that you see up there now. So really not the way that I think anybody wants to do business. It wasn't anybody's fault why it was expired. Some changes in leadership both here in the city and then within the police unions switching who they were affiliated with created that. So we're going to try to avoid that from happening, because then you end up having a 3-year impact by the time you hit your first year of that contract. Line number 2 is benefits. That includes all of your basics that you would normally think of under that, but it also includes uniforms, duty gear, and gym memberships. That is also rolled into that line item. Line 3 is office and general supplies. Basically what that covers is the copy machine leases and use, telephones, postage, our community outreach line item, and also general supplies and printing. Line 4 is specialty supplies. That's all of our duty ammo, range ammo, taser supplies, batteries, cartridges, and then any repairs that need to be done to any of that equipment. Line 5 is utilities. That's just gasoline for us. Line 7 is contract professional services. It touches a number of things within the police department. This gets rolled into a whole bunch of things in these lines, so I'll try and keep this brief. But it's state communications, internet access, our records management system, our CJIS secured email, our online scheduling program, the maintenance program for our infrared fingerprint machine. We still have to keep our old records management system, Spillman, active for 3 more years. It's our Axon body-worn camera contract, storage and replacement, our animal control officer salary. It's the Humane Society fees, also Lucky Puppies fees and their contract for the year. Translation services, IT services, fitness for duty testing, dues and professional memberships, which includes the FOP insurance that you approved 2 budgets ago, and the $12,000 $300 ad for the community outreach team. Line 8 under vehicles, that includes vehicle maintenance and repairs. all other maintenance and repairs for everything that doesn't rise to a capital purchase within the city, safety equipment, and equipment acquisition. And then line 10 is under miscellaneous is the WPD match for Margaret's position that I explained earlier. Emerging issues, we're not immune to, I think everybody, when they see this list, isn't going to be really surprised. Mental health responses, opioid epidemic and Narcan deployments take up a lot of our time. Obviously, you want to help these people, so it's not just a respond and you're done. It's respond, get involved, do check-ins. Part of the opioid project is we go back and we check on people, and if they fall off the map and we haven't heard from them, we go and find them, and we try and get them into treatment. And if they trip and fall, then we pick them back up and we try again. Winooski, many diverse cultures, and the complexity of calls for service has grown dramatically. Community policing and reactive policing are two totally separate things. So you add culture, language barriers, diversity, and the complexity of these calls, and I think you have to look at staffing in a whole new way. And I'm not saying that we need more police officers. What I'm telling you is I think we have to be really thoughtful about if we're going to spend exponentially more time on calls and trying to deal with societal issues, that the same amount of people cannot do all of that work and continue to do traditional policing roles. So it's something that we just have to keep in the back of our minds. Staffing levels, recruitment, employee retirements, training and promotions. I touched on all this before. We're all trying to recruit the same good people to get into police work, so it's very competitive. One of the things, let's back up 3 years. 3 years ago, we started the DEA task force. We started the Kuzi assignment. We started the domestic violence investigator. I knew at that time I was stretching us a little thin, and that's if everything went perfectly. Rarely do things go perfectly. So I've had 3 years to watch this and reflect, and it's just not sustainable with 16 people. So there's the changes that I was alluding to earlier are we're going to remove the Kuzi detective and bring them back. We've already ended the domestic violence investigator position, and that's going to be a uniform position. I'm trying to be creative because while we're trying to recruit employees, you have to have something that makes us an attractive place to work. And Winooski is a cool city, but sometimes that's not enough. So what I'm thinking is we're going to pivot a little bit and try and create some internal opportunities for people that will still be an opportunity to feel like you're advancing or doing a specialized unit. But they also won't be out of Winooski and not available to us. And I don't want to take up too much of your time tonight, but the unions come to me and asked if we could have a canine unit. I said we would talk about it if it. I think I've figured out a way that it'll be a zero cost to the taxpayer. We could use asset forfeiture to stand it up and to continue to pay for the program. Not saying that that's something you have to agree to tonight. It's something that would obviously involve a conversation, but I would at least like to put it out there that it's an opportunity that we could have, but we don't lose a patrol officer by doing it. One of the other things I've thought about doing is having a daytime detective that we don't have now. The great thing about this is, again, they would be in Winooski, and if somebody calls out sick or somebody's on vacation and patrol, part of the agreement would be is that they're going to backfill uniform as needed. So again, when somebody's assigned to Kuzi, we don't have that luxury, but still create opportunities, but try and improve staffing within the city for traditional policing. Regional dispatch, admin support, and the cost for physical upgrades. Really long conversation. I'm just going to try and hit a few highlights. I want to give credit to all the city managers. They're pushing through. We're at the point where this has fallen off the tracks about 5 times over the past 25 years. They're pushing through, and hopefully this is once town meeting day comes, and if the voters feel that that's something that we should do and continue those conversations. It brings a lot of opportunities for the dispatchers to have 5 or 6 or 7 of them sitting in one dispatch center, wherever that may be, and when one community is dealing with a major event that one person just physically can't handle by themselves, there's a lot of anxiety with this, right? Because it's change, and people are going from working here in the city where they're comfortable and they know it to a totally separate independent entity. We're going to work through all those issues. Jesse's been great about keeping all of the employees updated. we're just gonna keep, as each hurdle comes up, we're gonna address it. We'll keep pushing forward, and at some point, we'll come to you with a cost analysis and the reasons why we feel it's a good idea to continue to do it. Some of that's going to also involve some physical upgrades to the police department, though. If we're not gonna have a dispatcher in the building, the wheels start spinning about what I need to do to get ready for that. And I think some work on the D-cell, adding some bathrooms that just ended up being too costly the last time we were doing some capital upgrades. So if an officer is alone in the building, that they're not moving people where, we could have an issue where somebody, is in an unsecured area and they end up getting in a wrestling match, or God knows what else would happen. Admin support's another piece to that. We currently use Chris Gaudette, the public safety admin person, 2 to 4 hours a week. Dispatch easily does 10 times that. It's just one of those things. Again, do we have a front window? Do we not have a front window? How do we handle the administrative work that goes along with that? So as it comes up, we will figure it out and we'll deal with it. It's just something to keep in your minds as we go forward. And I'm going to end with state mandated policies. Fair and impartial policing is a pretty big one. Anybody who sees the news knows that there's a lot of anxiety, I think, on the national level about how we're treating refugees. And this policy was, I think it's in the third phase now. It's been well over a year. I'm going to be coming to you with the recommended policy that the working group has been working on for about 14 months. And it was pretty interesting. I'm going to steal the words of Councilor Mace on this one. Earlier tonight, she was talking about something with the Main Street project, and she didn't want to discount all of the work for the people that were tasked doing a certain task. And I think we're going to have to approach the fair and impartial policing policy that way. You're not going to love all the language. With a policy like that, I don't think you're ever going to get a diverse group of people in a room that are absolutely 100% happy with the finished product. I think there's give and take in these policies, and you will see that in the changes that were made. And I'm also going to provide some documentation on how those changes came about. So I would expect to see that in the next 2 to 3 weeks. July 1st is also an internal investigations policy that is going into effect. Doesn't have a huge effect on us. We already have an internal investigations policy. We're just going to be comparing what we have compared to what the legislature mandated to make sure that we're in compliance by July 1st. And I'd like to bring Eli up to talk about the Community Justice Center. Oh, actually, well, I'm sure. You probably don't have any questions.
We'll pause for questions for Chief. One thing that popped up, so we've just rotated people through a number of those opportunities that we thought would be great, growing and learning opportunities. Obviously, our decision to disengage in those opportunities at this moment does not preclude us from then perhaps at a future time when you've got potentially some other staff members of re-engaging those entities, right?
The opportunities are always there. I think, I could call Kuzi tomorrow and I'd be like, hey, do you need an extra detective? And they'd be like, of course. So those opportunities will be there. And I fully own and admit that when I put all these things in place, I knew 16, it was going to be a challenge, but the pros outweighed the cons for me as far as the development that these people were going to experience. And I still stand behind that decision, but I knew it wasn't sustainable if we didn't grow. And just based on a whole bunch of things that weren't in our control, with downtown development and things like that, we just weren't given the opportunity to grow. So now I think the responsible thing to do is come back and apply our 16 people to the police department here and try and support the 10. What was happening was we had 8, 9, 10 people left in patrol that were just being pulled in multiple directions and working overtime. And here I expect them to be friendly and attend community outreach events. And it's just too much for the people that just left here working patrol.
Sure. And kind of off the wall question: Have we wrapped up the JAG? Doggone it.
No. So what I've been told, I don't know if this is official, but the director of the Criminal Justice Training Council told me that no agency in Vermont has been awarded JAG money yet. And it's because the Department of Justice is waiting for the fair and impartial policing policy that they now feel is in compliance to go into effect March 1st, and they've requested a list of communities that have adopted that policy.
Well, that's a whole nother.
Yeah, and I don't mean to open that can of worms.
No, but I'm actually wondering about the, golly, as much as we've talked about it, pardon me, where we fund a position and it slowly declines the contribution towards the overtime.
So you meant the COPS position?
COPS, yes, the COPS.
Okay.
Grant. COPS.
So the COPS position, we actually had filed for an extension. It just finished December 31st.
Okay.
So we're starting our retention year as of January 1st.
Okay.
I think it's a great and responsible way to grow. And the way those, for anybody who doesn't understand, is you apply for that funding and it covers up to 50% of the cost of entry-level police officer for 3 years. Everything comes with a catch, and when you take that money, you're committing to keeping your staffing levels exactly the same. So let's say we applied for 2 of those positions, I'm being really optimistic. And it brought us up to 18. We would have to stay at 18 for those 4 years. Now, it doesn't mean as people retire, I mean, they understand that you're going to have recruiting and absences and things, but you have to make every effort to stay at that staffing level. You can't go backwards during the course of that grant.
Mm-hmm. Great. And it's like a year after too, isn't it? Or,
it is. So
yeah.
Next January, we will have completed our retention year for the one COPS grant that we have in place now.
Okay. Other questions for Chief?
Can you just talk about the Howard Center community outreach thing a little bit more? I understand like the sharing of the employees, but what does that actual job look like for the people? Is it similar to what Burlington and the Howard Center used to do with Justin Barrett and I think was another person?
It's very much modeled after the Burlington Street Outreach Team. So these people are going to be entry-level mental health social workers that are going to, and it doesn't have to be people that are in complete crisis. I'll just use a perfect example. You know, we've been struggling with some people that don't have any place to sleep and they've been using the bus stop. So, you know, we try and be sympathetic to their cause, but also realizing that, you know, people that want to go use the bus don't necessarily want to be walking over people that have been sleeping in there all night. So I use that as a great example of the way that the mental health people, along with the social worker part of what they do, come in and try and, okay, why is it that you have no place to stay? Could we help you? And try and guide people to just a better life. You know, it's not necessarily just people in crisis, just people that need help and direction.
So, just add to that, organizationally, the employees will be Howard Center employees, and they'll be part of this particular community outreach team program, but they'll report up to the first response team at the Howard Center that is in place for 24/7 coverage to support anyone in the region. The street outreach team in Burlington also reports to that unit. So in theory, the professionals in that larger unit are all professionals linked to one another, linked to the resources available in Chittenden County, and who hopefully are developing relationships with our residents, because you know, visitors or residents who come here in Winooski don't necessarily say, well, I'm not going to go over to South Burlington, that's a different community. It's all the same population kind of going around the county. So our 4 team members will be focused on the non-Burlington cities, but co-located at Howard with the Burlington team.
Gotcha. Great.
One of the other interesting things from a meeting that we attended too, that I never even realized the numbers, but even after the renovation at the hospital, the ER is only, I think they said they had 16 or 18 beds available at any point in time, and on an average 12 are taken up by people with mental health or drug issues.
I can tell you from a recent personal experience going in there and having a long wait with a family member that it was, I mean, they'll straight up just tell you right off the bat when you say like, oh my gosh, like there's no single bed, and they just go mental health. It's like there, and you can just see the stress on the employees there too, because they just simply want to help the people coming in, but you know they feel that it's just clogging the works so much.
And in the interest of giving credit also, I mean, one of the reasons why we can fund this effort at $12,000 a year is that the Agency of Human Services and UVM are stepping up to help contribute to the cost of this, with the idea that the more we can build relationships in the community and keep people in their homes and okay, hopefully the less they'll be sitting in the ER for nights at a time.
Sure, it's a good investment on their part.
Yeah.
Other questions, concerns for Chief?
I had a question about the final line item in your budget, if you could go back to that. Could you just, you were going over what was in that line item,
The final one?
the miscellaneous one?
Yep. So that's the reparative board manager position. It's a part-time position with prorated benefits, I believe. That's how you came up with that number, is that correct?
That is all salary and benefits associated with the position, but because it's an extremely part-time position, the only benefits are FICA, Medi, and the very small unemployment and workers' comp.
And that's, because it's so part-time, that's the reason we didn't push it up to the salary category?
It's because it's a transfer. The salary line item you will see in Eli's Community Justice Center.
Perfect, thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. This was a little cloudy for me up there.
Shows up as intergovernmental and
Yeah.
BLS.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks
you
for
very
all the
much.
work and thanks for, I mean, to both of you. And we'll just go ahead and praise you ahead of time. Not Eli, but I mean,
But we will not do it again after.
you know, not just the, you know, the work that you do, like putting out fires, responding to emergency calls, arresting people, writing tickets. It's the way that, you know, your departments do that work. And the human aspect that you bring to it that is only a tone that leadership can set. It's not something, quite frankly, that could grow and flourish without leadership that's making sure that that's the culture that's established there. And I think you should both be immensely proud at the development of culture and the spirit that both of your departments have and have developed more and more under your leadership. So
Thank you.
a lot of really, really amazing work, but a lot of really amazing cultural evolution and development that we should be really proud of. Congratulations.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eli?
Hi, everybody. How are you? Good. So, what you see in front of you is, it's not concrete. It's what we're hoping, what I'm proposing that we'll get. It is basically level funding at what we've gotten previously at 155. If you see the interdepartmental or intergovernmental, that's where the panel manager's position is, the 13752 at the far right. As in years past, most of this money goes to salary and benefits. I have very limited flex with regards to spending outside of salary and benefits, which is fine. So we're just going to continue to keep doing what we do, run the programs, help out in the community. Being part of the police department, Rick knows that however we could be of assistance, community forums, dinner, food, anything of that nature, coffee with a cop, that we're at his disposal. Definitely supporting what DOC has for us to do with regards to programming. Going to continue to run panels for low-level offenders. Going to continue to run COSA, Circles in Support of Accountability. All that is shown in this budget. We're going to continue, to do those programs. I don't know what else I can say as far as just, that's really about it. Professional services, that's not training and travel, but that's like, like community outreach and things of that nature. So how I pay for either renting spaces. We just did a film called The Untouchables at the Black Box. That's where that money came out of, things of that nature, trying to push, restorative justice practices and policies forward to the communities in Winooski and Burlington, dealing with, in that case, high-risk, high-need sex offenders. So, things like that, I'm just going to continue to keep doing what we do. And
The big emerging issue.
Yep, and it's a great segue. The big issue of how we do what we do is through DOC funding. It is a worry and a concern of mine that, all of our eggs are in this one basket. However, it is what it is for right now. The majority of the CJCs within the state are funded solely through the Department of Corrections. So if their budget decreases, if the state of the state takes a turn, which is probably likely. I've been hearing rumblings of maybe as much as a 10% decrease in funding. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's a worry. So I'll have to address that when it comes. I was just meeting with Derek, the RJ unit ED. He doesn't know anything. I don't know anything. When I do, then you guys will as well. And if, thinking pessimistically, if that does happen, then I'll cut everything I can. I'll get with Angela and we'll gut everything we can outside of staffing. That would be the last thing that I ever want to touch. I tried to be creative a month and a half ago with my budget. Unfortunately, it didn't work out.
So if I can just jump in here, I think this is one of the budgets that's the most difficult to do in this cycle, as opposed, we traditionally do it at the end of June when we know what the state budget's going to be.
Right.
I still think it's important to present them all together. It would be your discretion whether to hold off on this budget until later in the spring to vote to consider it. That doesn't really matter from a general fund perspective. We would still, even if we waited until June to have the conversation, the general fund would still be set. So I think my obligation is, if we see that reality, which I certainly hope we don't, because I think that restorative justice practices are one of the linchpins that keeps our communities healthy and functioning well. I think it's our obligation to come to you with a plan to figure out how to continue the program. So whether it's a budget adjustment or identifying other funds or getting creative about leveraging external funds, we still have the opportunity to come to you with that proposal, regardless of this, if you approve this budget now or in June.
Yeah.
And we've never in my 5 years approved it with knowledge of funding, so we're actually we're in the same place we always are, where we're going, we're gonna approve this and hope for the best.
And, right. And I don't mean to be so bleak. I'm just trying to be realistic.
Yeah, sure.
We don't know, what. So I try and game plan for all different types of scenarios, but definitely gonna keep doing what we do here with the people we have, with the leadership we have. So that's my mindset.
Well, and I imagine that's had a tremendous impact on those 140 minimum lives that you reached last year. That's an awesome number.
Thank you. But that also goes to the PD who, has referred us quite a number of those 140. So thank you. Thank you for
The other thing I'd just like to mention too is that Eli's done a tremendous job since taking over as the director. He hired two tremendous people. I'm always amazed that you can find such quality employees to only work in part-time positions, but he's really refunded and restaffed the Justice Center, and they're really touching people in a lot of different ways now. So thank you. Tremendous success.
Thank you. Thank you. But, and also, I know we're patting each other on the back, but it just, Rick found us, Rick found me, found us, Margaret, who's been phenomenal. She is quite the firecracker. She's amazing. She's fit right into our team, and I just want to thank you again. She's been quite the character. So thanks, man. Thanks for keeping an eye out. Yeah.
Questions for Eli? We're proud of all the work you do. It's awesome. It's such a great program.
Thank you, but it's really these guys. Thank you.
So then the last part of tonight's presentation, obviously we work tremendously hard with the Public Safety Commission, meeting once a month, really digging into all different kinds of issues within the city. They're starting to really hit their stride. I think we have a tremendous group of people now. We're finally fully staffed, engaged, ready to take on any projects that we give them at any point in time. I'll let Michelle introduce herself, but Michelle's going to come up, one of the members of the commission, and kind of just discuss the work we've been doing and their vision for Winooski.
Musical chairs.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi. So yeah, my name is Michelle McCutcheon-Shore. I have lived in Winooski now for 3 years, and I joined the commission about a year ago. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about kind of my perspective and what I've heard on the commission and what I've kind of learned over the last year. So we want to start by saying that I moved to Winooski 3 years ago because of the diversity, the downtown area. I wanted to be in a walkable community. Also because I could afford a house, if I'm being blunt, and that's one of the main reasons I came here. But then I joined the Public Safety Commission to really turn it into a place that I wanted to stay. I'm 31 now, I'm getting married this summer. I want to have kids in the next few years, and I see a community that is evolving and is growing and kind of bursting at the seams, and I wanted to make sure that we were policing the community honestly in the way that I would want it done. And by getting to know the chief and by getting to know John, I've just been blown away by what they do and their vision for the city. But I do find it is unfortunate that we haven't been able to give them more resources. I can't even believe what they do with what they've been given. And as much as the chief might want to say he's not going to say we need another police officer, I'll say it. I think we do need to start investing more in the public safety of this community, particularly as downtown keeps growing, as we're talking about a big convention center, or not a convention center, but having some type of theater up here. We're having concerts down the Circle. I know there's talks of having more concerts on the Green. We have all this amazing thing happening, but we still have this police staff that's pretty minimal. We have fire trucks that are old and diminishing, and we need to invest in them if we want people to stay in this community and grow their families here. There's a large transient population, but I also have a lot of friends that have bought houses here and want to raise their kids here, but they have concerns about the public safety of, when we see needles on the street or we hear violence in our communities. It makes us nervous to stay here with our kids, and the way that we solve a lot of those issues is through community policing, and we can't do that with the staff that we have. He's doing as much as he can, and I know he is, but unless we start investing in having more police officers, we can't do all that community policing that we see in our vision as a public safety commission. And what has really blown me away, what I've really learned, is that even if we decide we want those more police officers, it's going to take years to get that. It's going to take years to scale up. And so we have to start planning now to scale up to what we may need if we have all this growth that we're talking about. I mean, you were referencing how there's 100 open spots. So even you were just saying in our meeting the other day, like even if we handed him all this money and we said, go get as many police officers as you want, doesn't mean we could get them, right? And so we need to scale up slowly and plan for the future in our public safety as we do it with everything else. From what I've observed in Winooski, and what I've observed of being involved with just the public good in general, is that we tend to plan for the last disaster. And I think Winooski Law is always planning for when we are in that budget crisis, right? That's the disaster that we're always worried about. But there could be other disasters that are looming that we don't know about. And I don't want that disaster to happen and then we realize we need to invest in a bigger fire truck or we need to invest more in our policing. But we physically can't because it takes so long to do those things. I do want to appreciate that we finally are getting a new fire truck. I think there was a lot of creative budgeting that went into actually making that happening, and I'm really appreciative of that. I think that's recognizing what I'm saying here, but I do think it needs to be noticed that this is just patchwork, right? We're now desperate for one because that other fire truck is down. We don't have that future planning going on, or at least I don't see it quite yet, to make sure when the other one goes down that we have something else in the line. And I think that's about what I wanted to say. Do you want to add anything over there?
Okay. I'm Michael Rosenberg, and I chair the Public Safety Commission. I'm in my 4th year, and I live in a 5th floor apartment that our current area instructor probably can't reach. We joke about that at commission meetings. 2 things only. One is that despite the extraordinary service that our firefighters and our police officers have given us all these years, as the city manager pointed out a little while ago, there's a change in the firehouse. It's gone from being what was in essence a Vermont volunteer fire department run by its members to something that's now a more professional and becoming a very much more professional department. When we interviewed members of the fire department in the last couple of years. One of the things that some of the old-time members were most proud of was turning back money every year so that the taxpayers wouldn't have the burden of the fire department. But at the same time that very laudatory action was being engaged in, each truck we had was getting older and older, and there was no sinking fund or no reserve being set up to deal with what we face now, where a truck basically caught fire and can't be used. So it's very important to us on the commission that we be looking forward, not looking, okay, let's get what we can afford now, but what are we going to do in 2 or 3 years? What are we going to do in 6 or 7 years on the fire side? And on the police side, sitting here and listening for a couple of hours, what dawned upon me, and I hadn't thought about this until just now, is this is not, from a police standpoint, a level services budget at all. That by pulling people back, as Brian Corrigan said, from several things that they've been doing, that's a service that we're not getting. Okay? So this is not really a level service budget. It's a budget where people are being pulled back from important things that are good from a staffing perspective and from a relationship with other police departments perspective, in order to give us the patrol service that we don't actually have enough patrol officers to give us. And I think that we need to keep that in mind, and we need to be thinking about how are we going to add a couple more in a couple of years, and a couple more in a couple more years. And when the mayor pointed out the COPS program, that's how one of the officers we have now came on, and it's really something, since at least during that 3-year period, half of the salaries paid for. I would urge us going forward to be looking for ways to proceed in that direction, to be getting a COPS grant and figuring out a way to get the other 50%, because Michelle is dead on. If we want people like Michelle and Katie Jennings, who's another young member of our commission, to raise their families here, to buy houses and raise their families, they have to feel more comfortable than they can feel when our 2 patrol officers on a given shift are reacting rather than doing community policing that we all want.
Well said.
Thank you both. It's, I mean, can't say enough about the value of the commission system, but it's always really, really helpful to hear from people who are really passionate about specific areas of service and what's going on there. Have taken the time and energy to actually get into the details of it, where you really understand what's going on in that area. So that's what we designed this for, and we're incredibly appreciative of your time and work. It's always complicated. There's a number of asks from a number of different areas during the course of the year, and we have tried to step up investment in each area of the city. So we appreciate your patience and understanding that we do try to do the best we can with the resources that we have, but we hear you loud and clear, and that there are needs in the area. And you know, we for several years in our capital budget have had a fire truck sitting there on the list of things not receiving any funds, just so we knew it was lingering out there, right? Just so we knew it existed. And it's, you know, you're absolutely correct that we are now entering in a mode where we're doing better at long-term planning, but we've still got a lot of work to do, and understanding how we keep up with the growth and demand and meet service expectations is going to be something that's going to be the biggest focus for us going forward. And now that we've got our arms more around how to inspire development and see growth and make people excited about living here, now it's about keeping them happy, and that's a whole nother kind of good set of problems to try to figure out. So look forward to it, and hope to continue to see both of you here advocating for those issues, so we can hear intelligent arguments about why we should be investing in one area. That's great. Thank you all very much. Any questions or comments for anybody involved in any of that?
No, I completely agree with both of you. I think your statements were dead on. I really do.
One last thing I would like to acknowledge before Michelle steps down, though, is recently, over the past 2 or 3 months, we've really started to look at the strategic vision of the city. And the thing I really like about this group is that they get that safe, healthy, connected people. As far as public safety goes, also having a pool to go to, having a library that's open and internet access. And
to hear that.
As passionate as they are for, you know, things to keep us moving along, they are also very aware that that is all part of the puzzle too, which is a pretty cool thing to watch happen.
And you know what? That's our problem and job. You guys keep doing what you're doing too, right? we'll figure out the other pieces of it. I mean, that's what our job is. So but I appreciate that perspective too. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that it just boils down to that, you know, as much money and business and growth that's going on in this city, the fact that we're still sitting with 2 patrol officers on a daily basis, which how many years have we been sitting at that? You know, that how much this community has changed, and we're still sitting at that, you know, blows my mind. And I just want to make sure. I work in transportation, and I never thought there would be something that maybe a less sexy topic, but somehow public safety. Like, I love that in this meeting, the exciting part was the bike lanes. I still can't even believe that. We lost everyone for the public safety conversation, but you know, it's got to stay at the forefront where it might not be as exciting. And I know policing today is also controversial, so it's hard to even sometimes argue for money to be put towards that. But, you know, the fact that they are sharing a bathroom downstairs with people that they're pulling into blows my mind. There's so many aspects of it that I actually had a difficult time writing up what I wanted to argue for here, you know. And so I just think we need to put that more towards the top as everything else grows.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Thank you all very much.
Thank you for the
Nice
support.
job,
Great
guys.
job, appreciate it. Thanks for all the work that went into that, on all the prep on the budget. Okay. So that concludes item D. We'll move to item E, approval of the Chinon County Public Safety Authority, the Union Municipal District Agreement and Resolution.
So I think this is the 6th time this has been on your agenda. But this is the big vote. So put it on tonight because of the public safety conversation. So as you know, the the Joint Survey Committee has been working to stand up this Union Municipal District. We've drafted the agreement. The resolution's been reviewed by the state per the statute, and going around to the communities now to get the final vote. So your action for consideration tonight is to approve the agreement to be presented to the voters, and then approve if you so choose, approve the resolution that's required in advance of actually putting the question on the ballot. This has been considered in, I believe, including tonight, all the other Chinon County communities. Unanimously passed in Colchester, in Milton, I believe it's on South Burlington tonight, past Shelburne. Essex did voted it down for right now. They have some big leadership changes in their city and have a big new public safety building. So I think they're looking to see it stood up and then consider joining in the future. What will happen if it's put on our ballot and it passes? So assuming that 3 communities approve it at town meeting day, the Chinon County Public Safety Authority will be stood up. We will have a board seat on that. I will have hold that board seat. The city manager would hold the board seat. We then have 24 months to consider whether we actually want to receive services from the authority, and our vote to do so would be the council voting to adopt the funding memorandum of understanding between the city and the Public Safety Authority. So just because the voters would approve this in March does not mean we would join on July 1st. We would then go through a process, the Public Safety Board would go through a process to onboard communities at a rate that makes sense, and then we would come back to our communities and say, here's what the funding mechanism looks like, here's what the service delivery looks like, and make a decision at that point. Happy to answer any questions. We've talked about it a lot.
I think we've talked about it a lot, and that we've been a body that's been pushing forward on this and leading the charge in many ways. Questions, concerns, comments?
I just appreciate the thoughtfulness of the process because there are so many moving pieces, but having it go through those distinct channels that, you know, if other communities don't adopt this on a widespread basis, it gives us the opportunity to reevaluate. I really appreciate it.
Right. Good. Any other questions, comments, concerns? So folks at home, encourage you to reach out if you've got questions about this, and reach out directly to primary sources on the issue. Reach out to City Hall, reach out to your member of City Council for information about what this is about. You can also look back through our records and see a lot of other presentations where we went into incredible detail about this. Because again, this is something that folks will see come March. Okay, any comments, questions, concerns from the public? Thank you all for your lift on this to get us here. Don't want to, just because we're moving through it quickly, don't want to, we'll celebrate more later. Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion of approval of the Chinon County Public Safety Authority Union Municipal District Agreement and Resolution. Wow. I'm going to go motion by Eric and second by Brian Corrigan. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. There's a lot of people with their name on that one. Item F.
It's almost 9 o'clock.
Approval of the 21C grant application of the Winooski School District.
Go for it.
All right. So, fairly familiar grant program for us. We've been part of a grant with the school district for the past 5 years, so we're coming up on a reapplication this year. As I mentioned in the memo here, back in 2013, we joined on with the school as a co-applicant, and we're receiving some grant funds through that program to support a tutoring program, homework help program at our public library, a job skills training for our summer teen employees, and then some supplemental funds for recreational programming for youth. So this represents, I think, a really strong partnership between the city and the school as it relates to providing services for kids outside of the school hours, which is, as we all know, pretty critical to kids' outcomes and wellness. So really exciting to be back here again, working with the school very closely on the development of this application. I think you're seeing a lot of similarity here in terms of the pieces that we are anticipating running in this first year of this 5-year block, but there's been a lot of work to date in partnership with the school to look at how do we poise ourselves and position ourselves to be making some iterative changes year to year on this program. I think anytime you take two big institutions with a lot of bureaucracy and try to jam them together, that takes time. And so I think that there's a real desire to continue to make strides, but I think we're seeing a lot of just improvement of service and, again, positioning ourselves well to be doing more partnership work moving into the future. So.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's taking the extension of the memorandum of understanding. We talked about plowing streets and who's going to salt what, and, you know, taking it to a whole nother level of how we provide services together. So we're very proud of all the work you've done there. Thank you very, very much.
Yep. And can't say enough about the school's work too. I mean, they've been a great partner in this. So,
questions, concerns, comments for Ray? Looks great. Thanks for continuing to push this work. So with that, I'd entertain a motion. Oh, questions, comments, concerns from the public?
He's just skipping you tonight.
So with that, I would entertain a motion for approval of the 21C grant application with the Winooski School District.
Second.
Motion by Nicole, second by Brian Sweeney. Further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Motion carries.
all right. Thanks.
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah.
You would have stayed this whole time anyway,
I
right?
would have probably.
Okay, item G.
Asked to move that.
Treasurer position discussion. So this is a follow-up to our initial conversation in August that we were going to wrap up in September. We set out during that initial memo to do a few things. The first was to take a look at, it's been 3 years, take a look at the treasurer position, review, number one, and again, this was assigned to Councilor Mason and myself, review the charter roles and responsibilities of the position, look at the current treasurer tasks, basically what is the current status of work taking place there, what's going on, what's taking up a lot of time, and look at how the position fits into current city operations, giving staffing. It's also, since we've had a change in management and some evolution in staff, it was a good time to have a conversation with them about how the position is supporting sort of the day-to-day work in addition to the council's work. And then work towards providing a recommendation for potential updates to the position description and review, and also discuss the appointment process. Right now, it's in the charter says a term up to 3 years, or you can do a term of 1 year up to 3 years, or you can do basically 1 to 3 years. I'm saying that poorly, sorry. We've elected to go year to year as a standard here, but it also feels like because it's not elected treasurer position, there was also a desire to talk about, do we open it up periodically from time to time and consider it. So as a result of that, we, being Nicole and I, went through a number of steps, including meeting with the current treasurer, reviewing the charter materials, doing an overview of what the position's currently doing in terms of time allotment, meeting with city staff to talk through what operational support was needed and what capacity existed there, and sort of looked at the future, or where we maybe see some of the future going around resources in that area of not just financial checks and balances, but also finance. And the city's financial future. Will you please cut it any time? We also asked the league for assistance. The league was not able to provide us assistance because we have a city charter. We also sit down and spent about an hour with our auditor and talked through treasurer functions and got some feedback about items that we were considering. As a result of that, I believe this was Nicole can speak on her behalf, but I think the overall view is that number one, and I'll take this one as the person who wrote the position description initially. The treasurer position description right now is a little bit unwieldy and very open-ended in terms of where time is spent and how that resource is being steered from the council perspective. Meanwhile, the charter is very specific and limited in its scope and role. It's our belief, after having some conversations not just with the treasurer and with staff about capacity, but also with the auditor about best practices, that there's really an opportunity for us to more narrowly focus the position down into looking at meeting the basic requirements of the charter while shifting some of the other responsibilities that actually more naturally fit staff capabilities, things such as writing, proposing policy, a number of the checks and balances where we can actually handle that internally with professional staff and don't have to have another part-time position spending a number of hours on that. And then also providing both staff and council with finance analysis around that we can do either through development of current staff from their knowledge perspective, training and professional growth, or through contracted services where we can bring people in to give that level of financial expertise as well. And I think, just from a personal perspective, I think there's a real sense that the position as it's running and is designed right now is incredibly dependent on an individual who has been incredibly gracious with their time and possesses a combination of skills and knowledge base that is pretty rare to find in somebody who's going to be willing to fill this kind of role and is not a sustainable position that would be eligible for the future. And then finally, again, I'll just give my perspective and see if Nicole's got any changes to that, is that we really need to open this position up every 3 years. It's a position that is supposed to be holding a number of processes and positions accountable, and as such, I think there's real risk if we're not doing it on an election basis like a lot of communities do, where people vote a treasurer in, that we as a council have an obligation to post that as much as possible. So what did I miss?
Well, very well said. I think the treasurer's job description currently defines the job of a treasurer well beyond what's required by the charter and or what's best practice, based on my understanding of our discussion with the auditor.
And what
I
we're
think-
paying for at this point, right?
Right, and the sustainability of the position as written, I think is questionable. And so I think it served a purpose at the time, and now that we have some experience with the position and I think our own internal capacity at the staff level has developed tremendously during that same time period, I would feel comfortable scaling the position back to the more checks and balances role that's it's intended to perform, rather than the policy and advice role, which I think we really should be relying on our professional staff to provide us with, and not a separate position that's sort of outside of the organizational structure.
So what we've asked for tonight is, it's not on as a approval item, but to hear any concerns about the creation of bringing back a draft position description that is, I'll just say, significantly scaled back to really match the duties in the charter, and I think have that be the scope of the position moving forward as a best practice mechanism, and also to work with our attorneys if need be around language that can be included in regards to the term of the appointment and opening it up on a regular rotating basis. So we wanted to see if there's any concerns about that from council prior to starting that process, because we don't want to do work that people are concerned about.
That's right.
Sounds really logical to me.
Yep.
I appreciate all the hard work that you both put into starting to have this discussion.
I think it makes a lot of sense. My only concern is with staff already seeming to have so much on their plate. Is it able to be absorbed without any significant budgetary implications for staff? I think we should do this. I just want to make sure we hear from the affected parties that like, we need to take away from this position and push more into staff. Is that doable, I guess, is the question.
So I'll open it up because we're going to talk about that a little bit in H. But I'll also open up is our expectations that we will find some savings in this. And we're actually thinking about a couple different financial models that might include more of a stipend-like system that's predictable for somebody filling this position versus treating it like an hourly job. And then I'll turn it over to the person who manages staff.
So thank you. I appreciate the question very much. So you saw with the leadership budget that the finance and accounting function was one of the only places in the budget, other than the mental health section, where we actually added new services. I absolutely think that is important, and is important, quite frankly, regardless of what happens with the treasurer position, hence why we put it in there before this conversation. I think one of the things to keep in mind is those functions, we need to maintain not only checks and balances at the treasurer level, but checks and balances for our internal controls as well. So how we build up that finance team capacity while not sacrificing the integrity of the people who are collecting the money at the front end. So the kind of admin team and the finance team still needs to be separate, is the reason we were proposing the accounting clerk position. I think, and to Angela's great credit, and please feel free to jump in, she has been doing a lot of work already with the treasurer as policy is developed. So I think it's not necessarily a complete add, it's a shift of responsibilities. And I think by creating this accounting clerk position, which is what you'll see later in the budget, will free up hours for her to do some of that higher level policy thinking. And as we move forward, we really move forward both with policy, with the finance committee, with a TIF expiration, with managing significant federal grants, etc. we really need her expertise functioning at a much higher level, and somebody to support her doing the kind of operational tasks. But I believe with those two positions, and of course my thoughts as well, we can manage it. If you want to cut the accounting clerk and this, then we're gonna have some problems. But thank you for the question.
Fulcrum and lever. Other questions, concerns, and if there are, if there's not a number of issues, I think what will happen, I didn't put a timeline in here specifically because we did so well with the last one, is we'll jump right into that work, and we've got some other contract stuff we'll be working on anyway together, so we'll actually have some natural time to work on that draft and hopefully have it out in pretty short order. Any concerns?
That's mayor speak for get started.
I'm seeing and hearing none. Any questions, concerns from the public? So seeing and hearing none, we will move on to the final item, which we just got a little preview of.
So in the FY19 budget, you see that we have, we're recommending this out of an accounting clerk position. So just in the interest of having you understand kind of the full picture of what we're proposing, we wanted to bring you the job description in advance of the final budget vote in case there were some concerns. So again, this is about a $10,000 a year position, 12 hours a week, quite minimal, but really intended to do the accounting support functions, so that internal controls piece to support Angela, to support the administrative team, to ensure that our checkbook is balanced and transfers are made and technical stuff like that that Angela knows. So if you have any questions, you can bring her.
Questions or concerns for Jesse or Angela on this?
Is 10 hours going to be enough?
12 hours. 12 hours.
12 hours,
yeah. So we have actually piloted this concept this year with an intern, and working 12 hours a week, and it has worked very well. You know, these are the tasks that we'll give this person are very regular tasks that happen periodically through the year. So once somebody is up to speed on our processes and our system and our accounts, what's it called?
Accounts payable?
Ledger of accounts, thank you. We believe that it is feasible at this level. You know, I do think, kind of going back to some of the other conversations you've heard earlier tonight, things are moving quickly here, and if our financial picture changes significantly in the next couple of years, you know, if we're managing $10 million of state and federal grants, this position I think is one that could change quickly, but I think for our current operations, 12 hours a week will meet our needs.
Oh, we'll be back in a single audit.
Yep.
Any other questions, concerns for Jesse or Angela? Any questions, concerns from the public? So seeing and hearing none, that was a discussion item for context for this year's budget proposal. With that, we've completed tonight's regular agenda. I entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Brian Sweeney, second by Brian Corrigan. Any further discussion? Nope. Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. I failed you all by 6 minutes.
That was